Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, May 21st, 2024 to order. And I'd first like to recognize that we're meeting on the ancestral territories of the Sauk, Chianu, and Pacheedaht nations. There's an echo in here. Yeah, and I would like to look for an approval of the agenda. Okay, we don't need a seconder, so all in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. And next up, we have reports, and I'm assuming that we have some staff reports coming.
Yeah, thanks through the chair to council. We got workshop today as requested by council. We're just TMP workshop, and we're looking at level of service areas as well as applicable cross sections for those areas, and just hoping to gain some good valuable feedback from council on to what they're looking for level of service, and if there's any changes to those boundaries, as well as any sort of concerns with any of the transportation cross sections. And we got Beth and Dan here from Urban Systems. They get a presentation, and then we'll be able to get into the workshop after that, but I will turn it over to them to go forward with their presentation to council.
Sorry, Councillor Bateman. Mike.
We've received the presentation that you're about to present about 2 minutes ago. And I'm wondering, could that have been delivered earlier, or was that just the way we have to roll today?
We just got it.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I just want to confirm that Mayor Tate is actually virtually here. She sent a message to that effect, but I don't know if that's actually happened, so.
She's online, yes.
Yep, okay, cool.
Correct, Mayor Tate is online.
Correct, thank you.
Testing. Yes, okay, great. I'm just going to test this, make sure I understand how it's working. Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us this afternoon to present on the subdivision development standards bylaw, most importantly, the cross sections found within it. Dan and I are both happy to be here and looking forward to the outcomes of the session this morning. Quick introductions of ourselves. My name is Beth Herford. I'm a transportation planner with Urban Systems. I live and work in the city of Victoria. And I'm also a planner who previously was involved in the development of the transportation master plan for the district of Sauk. So really appreciate being able to see how the plan is being implemented and learning a little bit more around the challenges and opportunities it presents.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Casey, also a transportation planner with Urban Systems based out of Victoria. I've been doing this for about 18 years, and part of that experience includes the 2020 Transportation Master Plan for Sauk. I'm old enough, I was also part of the consulting team on the 2009-2010 TMP, and at that time, part of the OCP review team and town center plan team as well. It's quite early in my career, so a little bit of lineage here out in Sauk. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, wonderful. So as far as our plan for today, I know Mr. Carter mentioned that we would have workshop portion towards the end, but we've actually split the session up. So what we'd like to do is kind of provide our initial understanding of the current challenges and the ideal outcomes of today. We may or may not reach those outcomes, but we'll outline them to get us all going in the right direction there. As far as the second session, we'll talk about the TMP, provide an overview of really the shaping influences and how those came to place and how those therefore influenced the bylaw 404. Following that, we'll summarize and have opportunity for questions, conversation related to the TMP itself. And then we'll move into the subdivision development services bylaw and cross sections particular, also demonstrating the relationship between the TMP directions and the bylaw itself with those local cross sections. Again, opportunity for input and open discussion at that point. And last but certainly not least is a service area overview and an option to present. This is just one option, and there may be many others that may be discussed. But that's kind of, I suppose, providing a bit of a foundation as far as the types of considerations that can be made in revisiting cross sections and the service areas they apply to. And then, of course, some clarifications around next steps as an outcome of the session and closing. So as far as what we understand the challenge to be, we understand that variance requests have been received more so over the last kind of 6-12 months. And they're not necessarily in alignment with the applicable road cross-section or level of service for the applicable area. Those are the cross sections that are living within the current bylaw 404. And then we understand that most of those variances are occurring around local streets, whether those be local suburban and rural areas. So as far as what the ideal outcomes is, we would love to be able to have input here that would kind of inform any changes to the bylaw 404 update, which is currently underway. When we say kind of what and where, the what is what do the cross sections need to include, and the where is where should they be applied. Those are the two kind of big questions here. And within the what and within the where, there are always many variables as well. But those are the details that we're looking to discuss and have some input on from yourselves today. So the Transportation Master Plan, it is a document that articulates the community's vision. And typically these are supporting an OCP. They direct decision-making and implementation, but they're not regulatory in nature. So typically they are inspiring for the regulation. In this case, bylaw 404, where we can find the cross sections that pertain to this conversation today. Now, as you can see here, the bylaw 404, it is a requirement of subdivision or building permit. It establishes standards for all works and services on or immediately adjacent to a development site. That is the regulatory piece of the discussion today. For the development of the TMP, I'd say there are about 3 main phases of engagement. So open house and community workshops. It's also much of this engagement occurred concurrently with the Parks and Trails Master Plan at the time. So open house, 2 open houses, a larger community survey, stakeholder workshops and interviews. And finally, you'll see it there in a different color, was a virtual open house. So just reminding the group that this process was kind of concluded in the very early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. The vision, this is a long-term vision. This vision was drafted based on other guiding policies that were in place of the district, in addition to input from the community. So this is a long-term vision really meant to demonstrate what the community would look like when the TMP is fully implemented. Just to read it here. So Sooke is a community where people of all ages and abilities meet their day-to-day mobility needs using a variety of travel options that are convenient, safe, connected, and support Sooke's aspirations to be healthy, vibrant, and sustainable community. Other shaping influences include goals. So these all have supporting text, but multimodal options, overall connectivity, sustainable transportation, livelihood, investment, partnerships. Realistically, all of these supporting a complete multimodal network throughout Sooke. We also had shaping priorities as part of this plan. And you can see here 5 on the screen. The 3 that we've kind of highlighted with those dashed lines are those that are most applicable to providing multimodal facilities on all Sooke's district roads. And the one that we've kind of highlighted most is the complete streets. So for complete streets, we really want to kind of highlight that this plan, the 2009 TMP, was developed to represent a new vision for mobility in Sooke. That realistically, we're enhancing safety, we're broadening travel choices, and creating the barrier-free community. Again, providing that multimodal facilities on district streets. The actions, there are, I believe, 7 under this area, but that we thought was most applicable was to create the complete streets, provide safe, comfortable operating conditions for all travel modes. And generally just highlighting that the streets are a very large portion of public lands and often are seen to better balance needs of all travel modes and provide some of the recreational facilities as well. Quite small print on this slide, apologies for that, but the Transportation Master Plan includes 7 cross sections, each of those relating in some way to its own classification of roadway. Here you can see Highway 14, arterials, collectors, locals, and laneways. Under collectors and locals, there are multiple cross sections. And we've highlighted local here as that's the area that we understand to be the receiving the most requests for variances. You can see kind of the typical treatment for several of these, and most importantly here, seeing the pedestrian facilities, cycling facilities, and the use also for multi-use pathways in rural areas. Again, just demonstrating what we would typically expect to see within a cross section, and the available widths we also take your attention to for a local at 18 meters. We'll get into what this means in the bylaw 404 portion of the presentation. So here, just generally showing the road classifications to build on the context of the previous slide in the cross-section characteristics that are typical for those. And much of these are now included in the subdivision 404. Oops, sorry. I'm excited there. Oh, where am I going? Did I go the wrong way? Okay, sorry about that. I think it skipped ahead a dozen. So in summary, when it comes to the Transportation Master Plan, it was informed by, well, it was obviously inspired by the original Transportation Master Plan, updated to reflect better modern best practices, with much input from the community reflected in the new updated 2020 Transportation Master Plan. It does include that long-term vision for the multimodal transportation network. The goals and priorities support multimodal infrastructure and highlight the importance of better balancing the needs of all road users. And the cross sections identified within the TMP provide space for people walking, cycling, taking transit, and driving, therefore helping realize the long-term vision of the TMP. So with that, this will be our first opportunity for some questions or discussion around the Transportation Master Plan directions held within it. I've got a few prompting questions here that I will read out, but certainly open to larger discussion. So we would love to understand what some common challenges you encounter related to realizing the directions set forth in the TMP. What are the common concerns to the existing cross sections, those that are within the TMP and therefore now living in bylaw 404, and any other items related to concerns or items for clarification from the Transportation Master Plan? So that's portion 1 of 3, opening table for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so questions from council, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, there's, we've had a number recently where somebody's just straddling their property. They're not changing anything. They're not building anything. They're just changing the status. Like they have built a duplex, which they rented and now want to change it over to strata so they can sell it. And with this 404 kicks in, we start demanding all sorts of things on the street, and we haven't changed anything. There's no new building going on. So it's just sort of one of the problems is where we actually implement this 404. I think we've had 3 recently with that thing. One is somebody subdividing their property again, just to sell it, not to build on it. And everything kicks in, new street lights, sidewalks, and a lot of these areas, the whole area is not going to change for many, many years. And putting a sidewalk in just doesn't make any sense. So that's one of the frustrations. The other frustration for me, I should probably let everybody else speak too, is we're putting this standard, which is to me a good standard for new subdivisions, in areas that are very rural. Souk has some rural areas and they're not liable to build out. And I don't think in the whatever OCP we're going to be using, there's calling for that in the future anyways, and yet we're demanding, $100,000 in improvements. So it's a little frustrating for us because the citizens are, again, staff is doing their job. They're applying the rules we give them. And then they come here for variances, and it's very controversial at best. So that's a few of the problems that I've encountered in the last little while.
Counselor Bateman?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation, which I look forward to absorbing at my leisure later. I think this is a fantastic transportation master plan. So thank you very much for your work on that, to Ms. Hooper at the back here and all the staff who were involved in building out this very 21st century AAA master plan. So some of the challenges, apart from my own general lack of knowledge and understanding of this kind of day-to-day realities that staff face, there seems to be a bit of an inconsistency. So we're applying these suburban standards to all areas of the community growth area, correct? And hence, when we get the Mowich and the Woodlands, that's all in the community growth area. So staff are asking for the full complete street local. Hang on. But the key point to me, it seemed, is in map number 1 in this plan, there is a recognition that there are high, moderate, and low growth areas within the community growth area. And when we look at a Woodlands or Mowich or Croydon Place for that matter, they are outside the sewer specified area and therefore would qualify as low growth. So my frustration is to not see a nuanced approach to the application of these cross sections. That would be one frustration. Other frustrations, the fact that the walking and rolling short-term action number 1, which very specifically states that we need to establish a reserve fund for cash in lieu of frontage works that will support implementation of other priorities, the key identified routes to school priorities and main arterial priorities for sidewalk construction. That hasn't happened yet. And that was a short-term action 4.1 right at the top of the list. Also, the action plan, we haven't seen a progress report to date. So I'm great to see item 3 in today's recommendations that we would do a midterm review and refresh and update. Yeah, I think that's all for now for me, but no questions. I'll
Okay.
comment.
Thank you.
Okay, next I'll go to Mayor Tate.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Just a few things that have emerged, just building on what other councillors have said, is some of it's a policy change. I seem to recall, rather than full out requirement of a sidewalk to be built out was cash in lieu. So at some point in time, when the district goes to advance assets in those areas, there would be cash to do so, but that's not here. That might be more policy related than the plan itself, but it seems to be more apparent since the plans have been adopted. Some of it is the standards. So where I get a bit stuck is, okay, Councillor Bateman referred to the suburban over the rural area. I agree with that. But also in the town center, where we, even as a municipality, have invested in attractive pavers to have and to show identification of the town center, which you see from Churchstead McGregor, are in place, but then not a requirement, and a different treatment is used as development advances. So I don't understand why that changed, because this was all around town center design. Up on the upper part of Church Road, so say from going up Church Road, you see the sidewalk standards change. It goes from proper sidewalks, then it goes to like an asphalt trail, and then you change to sidewalks again. So in some cases, yes, the district put in the multi-use trail, but as we are continuing to advance this, why is it that and not something different? The lighting, when we require that, I'm not seeing a preference of night sky, so downward cast lighting to eliminate the sidewalk and not the sky. A lot of concerns about the brightness of LED lighting. I get it's more energy efficient, and there must be other kinds of covers and the like, because we do have migratory birds, and that's everywhere in Souk. So that's you know, I agree with the lighting. I don't understand the change there though. The other, I'll just leave it with one more thing here, is boulevard treatments. It seems mandatory to have irrigated sod in place. And is that because of fire smarting, or is it because in some places these areas are narrow, 3 feet, like 5 feet distance between dwellings? There may be a preference for crushed gravel to make it more a utility type area. And then over time, these things, the grass grows, it doesn't get cut, it becomes a fire hazard as opposed to fire smarting. So why so rigid on boulevard treatments? We understand mulch can be and fire, you know, now that we fire smarted, where does this step in here? And I'll leave it at that in terms of, and the other things, I agree, all the variances that have come forward with one size fits all. Thank you. So not really questions, but it's why we're here. These are some challenges that have arisen, and the challenge statement comes is that we have to wait till we get to a council meeting, put together reports, discuss it at the whole, and it creates time and delay and takes up agenda space for everyone. Okay, thanks.
Would you like to respond to that?
May I clarify? I'm curious if the requirements for the lighting and boulevard treatments are within the TMP or in bylaw 404 currently. 404. Okay, thank you. We probably get a little bit more into that in the next few slides then. So thank you for the comments.
And Councillor St. Pierre?
I think that part of the reason that we're having basically a tug of war here between the TMP council and so on and so forth is also that we have long-term residents who own property, and they come forward with what seems like a very minor project that's not necessarily going to increase the population a whole lot, but looking at a subdivision and stratification recently as 2 examples. I know that pretty much the only time that we can expect a windfall for these residents is when this sort of thing happens. Because if you take a lot and you cut it in 2, you have essentially created 2 lots you can sell. You can now make some money off it. Same thing with the strata. Having said that, I think there's probably a feeling that people don't necessarily always have an extra $60,000 or $70,000, even though they might be potentially looking at a financial gain. I'd like to know more on the philosophy, the options, and more or less what the approach is in terms of this particular piece, because I think that often council is being put in a position where people that they can see right in front of them who may potentially have unknown financial hardships are not necessarily being balanced with the needs of the future community and other residents and other taxpayers. But I'd like to know more about that piece.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure we have a solid answer there, but I think some of the thinking around it is subdivision or development permit is your opportunity to gain those either the physical infrastructure or the monies to build that physical infrastructure in future. And every time one of these subdivisions occurs, and either the frontage works aren't built or the money's not gathered for the municipality to build at a later date, we're essentially, if that street is to sort of realize that intended ultimate design and build out, like is kind of shown in the TMP and some of those 404 cross sections, is if it's not built or the monies aren't secured, then we're basically sort of forwarding that burden onto the broader tax base to build that infrastructure in future. So granted, some of these sort of smaller subdivisions or smaller dividing a single lot into 2, there's not necessarily a big windfall there, we'll say, not like say a larger development site, but not securing that money or not securing those works when the opportunity arises really does push that cost onto the community in future. Yeah, so that's really is a big part of this, is sort of we have a vision, your TMP has a vision for how the community is going to build out. And if we don't realize that is at the opportunity we're able to, when subdivision or development permits are issued, we lose that opportunity, and then realizing that vision is then put onto the put onto the broader tax base.
I'll go to Counselor Pearson, Meadows, St. Pierre.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and sort of the walk through this most recent transportation master plan. So I think the struggle for me personally is that as we transition from a rural based community to an urban community, we still have these legacy neighborhoods that have bigger properties. We're not looking at infill in our downtown core appropriately. We should be focusing on that infill. And that should, by osmosis, eventually push us to the rural. So we're struggling as a council with those little incremental changes. I think for me that bylaw 404 and the transportation master plan probably have some collisions in it, as most plans do. And we haven't really vetted that out to see what it looks like in that for me is like less than 4 lots being subdivided. The economy of scale for somebody coming forward to stratify their duplex per lot cost exponentially goes up. When what we're really looking for is that densification in our downtown core. So if we can get 20 houses on that particular piece of property, as opposed to half of a duplex that's already existing. So that person has to be in that same time, in that same distance, they still have to build that 100 feet of road. And in some cases, like the one we saw last week, we've actually wrapped it around a corner because they happen to be in a corner lot. So we're asking for frontage improvements on 2 streets for something that's already existing. So it sort of feels very, I don't know, incongruent to be asking for that amount of exchange, even though we support the transportation master plan. So that's the struggle I have is looking for that balance. And is there a way for 404 to change in its application and identify certain roads that require an input, which may be cash in lieu or what, I don't know what that looks like. And I don't even want to guess at that. So that's my struggle is those 1, 2, 3 lot subdivisions. You're asking for, $500,000 where it's fine for somebody who's putting 16 or 20 units in on that same size of property. Struggle. Anyway.
Counselor Meadows.
Yeah, once again, I'm agreeing with my colleague here. Doesn't happen very often, but it does. Yeah, I know. I guess, you talked, I mean, we have to plan for the future, understood. That, we have to take something when we can, because we lose the opportunity, it's lost forever. But the burden that we're putting on some people that are coming before us that are just looking at this one lot, they're just splitting their property, or they're just technically drawing a line down their property and doing nothing more. It could be very, very expensive, and it's not in proportion to what we want to accomplish. So we need to find a way that we can extract something, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars for something that's already there. So when we're applying this one broad brush, again, designed for subdivisions, and I understand the streetscape we were asking for is because of some of these subdivisions that's gone in the past. You can't get down the streets, they're so narrow, and it's just totally inadequate. So we're looking for a higher standard, but we just can't tie it together with everybody. There's always exceptions to the rules. And it seems lately we've been a lot of those exceptions, and they're generally these small developments, which doesn't make sense to ask for the developments that we're doing. Maybe some land dedication fine for the future, but it's we understand the reason for it. But then again, when you implement it, it doesn't seem to be working for us and our citizens, and that's who we're working for. So it's very frustrating.
Counselor St. Pierre, and then
I think I had something else to say, but I'd like, actually, I'm gonna ask, put a pin in this, statutory right of way versus. Anyway, I just wanted to comment on what Councilor Meadows was saying. I think it's easy to forget that when people are actually just putting a line down their property, they're just putting a line down their property, not building anything, no shovels in the ground, but they've actually made several $100,000. It's very easy to, they're making money, no doubt. And often, I mean, if you're looking at what's a lot worth, right? So I mean, I just want to make sure that that's kept in mind, because at the same time as we're trying to protect people and trying to make sure that things fit properly, we have to make sure that the cost is actually on people who might be able to afford it. And so you spread it out through the community. Maybe you're looking at seniors, looking at people who don't want the property taxes going up, and yet they still want sidewalks. So keep in mind that the people who are doing these 2 or 3 lots are doing it because they can make a profit at it. They're doing it. I mean, they're developers too. They're trying to make some money. And they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't think they could make some money. We have to make sure it's not egregious. We have to make sure that, you know, we're not asking more than is reasonable, but it's reasonable to ask for something.
I know it's not my turn, but I'd like to respond to that because that was directed directly to me. Councillor St. Pierre, I fully understand that. Like I say, I understand from my perspective that somebody's making some money and good on them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with people making some money at time. I agree with you. I think we do need to extract something, but to go and insist that they put all these things in that aren't needed at the moment. If we could take something, a smaller amount, I think the people would be happy to do that. So I understand. I'm not arguing against you. I'm saying I agree with you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bateman.
Okay, so I have a question this time, and I want to bring it back to what I feel is the magic bullet in this plan, and we don't have a smoking gun yet, but the magic bullet is action 4.1, establish let me read it aloud again, establish a reserve fund for cash in lieu of frontage works. So these owners of these subdivided properties will need to pony up to support the implementation of walking and rolling projects identified in the TMP. So as 2 architects of the plan, please tell me your thinking around that, and then I'd have a follow-up question.
Sure, I think my thinking at least is that we've kind of batted around this idea that, you know, as subdivision or as development permits are issued, that's our opportunity to secure the works or secure the funds to do the works. That's exactly what you're picking up on is, okay, what could securing funds to do the works in future look like? This happens in certain other communities, and what I would want to sort of caution or lead with is the parameter. So if that route is picked up on, is the parameters around which how that money that's collected will be spent, because the tendency, shouldn't say tendency, but there is the opportunity that money is, you know, intentionally and sort of with good intentions taken to replicate the frontage that's not being provided, but then lost and, you know, spent somewhere else. And that doesn't do anything to achieve that sort of streetscape that we're trying to achieve on the corridor where the frontage wasn't provided. So that can absolutely be done. I would really like to see parameters around it so that that money is collected and used in a beneficial way.
So all reserve funds, of course, have terms of reference, and so this would be developed. There was consideration to if I'm a homeowner and I contribute cash in lieu, would that improvement need to be done in future in the direct proximity of my property, or can it in fact, as I think it says here, be used for community priorities?
As a municipality, you can dictate the terms that are put on that. Community priorities is very open to interpretation, but you can establish those terms.
I would argue that because your TMP here does give us priorities. I think there's a clear statement here of, where is it? Highway 14, Grant Road, Otter Point, Throop, routes to schools, streets with public transit, connections to parks, trails, recreation facilities. Yeah, those are the main. So here's a document that maybe captures community will. Ideally, even just 60 people at your open houses. So my follow-up question then is over to staff, and is this in the works, or is it just capacity to deliver on this reserve fund, or how?
Through the chair to Councillor Bateman, it's something we can consider, but like Dan alluded to, it's something you really got to be cautious about, because there's only so many funds available within SUC to do capital projects. We put forward with the finance department, the 5-year financial plan that outlines the main priorities in the TMP that we're bringing forward. So typically, and in best practice, engineering and planning, if you're taking money for cash in lieu, it should be one, based on the plan for that road, so everyone consistently pays cash in lieu amounts that are in alignment with the frontage that's for that road. And if the cash in lieu of policy gets developed that says, hey, we're gonna take cash in lieu and we're gonna put it in a pot of money and we're gonna spend it on our main priorities. What that is doing is you're telling the residents of that street, when someone develops there, we're gonna take cash for improvements that should go on that street. We're not gonna keep that money in your street to improve it in the future. We are gonna put that towards basically our bigger priority projects, being the Throop Connector, Phillips Corridor, Charters Corridor, all these big projects that are gonna benefit the community. It offsets us a little bit of funding towards these bigger projects that are our priority, but it leaves absolutely nothing for the residential streets that then start deteriorating. And when we need to come in there, whether to do an infill project to pick up the gaps between a couple sidewalks to nowhere, or we need to rehabilitate the road surface and maybe put a small walking trail on the side, there's zero money there to do that. And then we have to bring something forward to council and say, this little side street has come to us and they want improvements done. We have no money to do it. It's going to be $2 million to upgrade this street. We need to put this, or give you the decision to prioritize that over other major TMP projects that are in the 5-year financial plan. So it's a really slippery slope to play on. We can bring options forward if that's council's desire, and we can go forward with something like that, but I would caution against it.
I guess just to have a couple more, if it's incremental, isn't it? So we have major priorities, community identified priorities, and someone like the French Road applicant could contribute to the build out. And then once those are built out, then we start looking at our secondary roads. So all over time. And there's also this local area service improvements that a neighborhood could gather and say, we want a sidewalk and we're prepared to pay for it. Yeah.
I don't understand the question.
Well, I don't think there was a question.
Okay.
As usual with me.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, I think we all want to see these complete streets. However, building out sidewalks in established neighborhood piecemeal over a period of decades does not create an adequate description of complete streets, in my view. And it looks kind of ridiculous when you kind of put them together piecemeal. And so, yeah, I think I would like to look at how we can either collect the money to do complete build outs that look like they belong, rather than do it piecemeal over decades, when by the time it's complete, it's time to start tearing it up and rebuilding. Councillor St. Pierre.
I think we're all struggling with this piecemeal thing, sidewalks to nowhere kind of thing. Does it work? Has it worked elsewhere?
Yeah.
Does anywhere have a place where, I mean, is this something that regularly works or regularly just leads a sidewalk to nowhere? Just.
So if I could provide at least a partial response there, I think we have seen it work in other communities. I think sort of combination of approaches has been generally effective, where in certain cases where development is more, full scale, you build the sidewalk on day one. There may be other instances where you're right, it might take 10 or 20 years before adjacent parcels develop, and a 50-foot or 100-foot link of sidewalk doesn't have a ton of value in the short term. There's sort of this trigger point then where if you're collecting monies, at what point do you sort of pull that trigger and go, okay, now we're going to build that sidewalk for that entire block or for that entire stretch of road. I do think sort of being open and flexible in that approach is important. I do think though too that either building that infrastructure or collecting the money to build it at a later date is important. Otherwise, it's going to again be back to the broader taxpayers to fit the bill for completing that piece of work. I think also if we are entertaining this sort of collect money and build it later, we do need to be very careful that we collect enough that we can build what we're trying to build. If the tendency is to sort of make it more appealing to an applicant to pay out of building the infrastructure than building it itself, then the municipality might find itself in a position where you've sort of committed to building something that we don't have the funds then to actually build. And so I think a bit of a combination of approaches is needed, but foundational is the regulation in place that allows you to require that infrastructure.
Councillor Bateman?
Yes, through you, who do you know of who has successfully implemented cash in lieu?
I-
So give us some names.
In terms of well, you do see it in, I guess it's 2 municipalities over. Langford has built out both in piecemeal and then taken money to build more full scale. A relatively, especially in areas like, Pete Road or in and around Goldstream, which were established previously and then sort of redeveloped over time. We've seen it there. I think that's a relatively rapid growth community. So conceivably sort of development occurring more quickly helps that happen more quickly. We've seen a little bit of that up island too, and I believe the city of Courtenay does something similar too, and we've seen a little bit achieved through the same means up there too. Yeah,
That was Courtney.
Courtenay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a difference between like an urban area that is redeveloped over time, established but redeveloped, versus a greenfield site that's built from scratch or from very rural, kind of a rural standard. Very much a distinction between those two. Yeah.
So, and just to build on that a little bit more, so a lot of municipalities take cash in lieu, where it's a slippery slope and where legislation is like foggy on this, is taking cash in lieu and using it for other areas. That is a very slippery slope. I know Coquitlam and Kelowna is experimenting with that a little bit to push boundaries, but it's all about the boundaries they're pushing is they're basically saying, we are going to take this cash in lieu from these areas and we are going to put it into our priority list that we see deemed as a priority, which a plan is in place for, which in our case, it is the transportation master plan and our 5-year financial plan. So it's what, if council wants to make that commitment, I can take them down the slippery slope. It's no problem to put the policy framework together. I can do this, but you're essentially going to be saying to the residents, we're going to take money for your street that people are paying cash in lieu for future improvements. And we're going to put that into some big level priority projects, and the money will not be there to build out those streets. And that's what I caution. We may have to go down and do a maintenance project and repave a street or something like that, but you will not build out the complete streets plan that the TMP is informing bylaw 404 with. So it's a slippery slope, but it's a decision, and council is the decision-making body.
Yeah, so you could make it a little nuanced, excuse me, and say the French Road applicant, if he contributed in cash in lieu, that could have been to improve the Grant Road sidewalks, for example, or build out Grant Road to a, so that would give proximate value to whoever. Anyway, slippery slope.
Is, and like Dan alluded to as well, it's taking the money. So council sometimes doesn't maybe want to put the burden on to say the one property owner for a substantial amount of work to construct it into a sidewalk for nowhere. And I agree, sidewalks to nowhere are not ideal. But at the end of the day, cash in lieu shouldn't be in a negotiated amount. It should be whatever that plan is for that street. There's the engineered estimate for it, and we are going to take that amount of money. So not necessarily is cash in lieu a lesser amount than it would cost them to construct it. It's an alternative to basically not constructing it and putting that money aside. And when it's used for years out, 10, 15 years out, the money collected today is not going to be enough to build it. So if in developing a cash in lieu policy, something that council should consider, so it's not giving, I guess, not necessarily false information, but information on, hey, we're going to put this money aside to collect for a future date. Cash in lieu should literally be 30-40% more in some cases than it is to construct the actual works. It's a difficult one.
So, Mayor Tate.
Nope. Thank you, Chair. I'll see if I can articulate this properly. It seems there's something missing from the plan. So I can appreciate that if I was developing and let's say the cost that I needed to do frontage wise was 80,000 and either build that at the 80,000 or provide 80,000. It's likely what you'll see is developers would say, well, hold on a second. I want to make sure that that 80,000 is earmarked specifically to this road. Because I think there could be pushback to, well, I don't want to fund the French road or pardon me, a Grant road or a different road. If I'm going to invest in it, it would be to this particular land. I could see that coming up. I think the challenge though is that it's the time. So we have our 5-year financial and the transportation master plan. And yeah, if this is where the time kicks in, because when you hear, oh, you need to put in this frontage because in 50 years it'll be required. We're not planning that far out. So how today do we know that that is the standard we want in that area when it's not even captured by the plan, not even the OCP? We just generally know it's a rural area. It's difficult to say, build this modern streetscape, because that in itself is going to change. If it were, say, adjacent to Sun River, then you would say, okay, well, you're building onto this neighborhood, so you need to build in the same, because that's the way that neighborhood is built out. So in some ways, what's missing is when those items come up, we're planning for them. So at some point, some areas are done and will be, and then it's asset management policy going forward. But in others, when exactly is it going to come online? And that's where in the rural area, we're not seeing those lands come online anytime soon. They're not on sewer. They're definitely rural roads. So to build out a sidewalk in frontage there you just can't see it. It's not even in the community. It's in the community growth area because that boundary is around the whole town. It's not, but I don't see that area growing because it doesn't have the infrastructure in the ground to support growth. And then, so that's why that's where in some cases, okay, I think we almost need to date some of the building stock and over time identify where the growth is. So that's age of the building, maybe land assembly in the core. You're going to need to put in modern infrastructure there, but on a place that's completely built out, well, it should have been required when they built it in the same place because nothing's changing. That's why it just seems that something is missing in the plan, because we have priorities that are established and we're doing those things, but there's other ones where there is no plan. And that's where like Ella Road is a total mess. And we need tax dollars to go in and fix that road, which is part of the overall plan because the road itself has completely failed. And then that'll take care of that whole street, which makes sense. But there's no growth that's going to happen there because that's not even on water, those parcels of land. So that's where I just think that there's just a piece missing here. And if this transportation plan is only going to see 20 years out, then how can you secure something for 50 years in the future? I'll leave it at that. But I think that's the piece where it's one size doesn't fit all within our own community. It has to be neighborhood to neighborhood almost. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think we all want to see sidewalks, and residents have been asking for sidewalks for years. But I think what they mean by that, and what I mean by it, is complete sidewalks on high traffic areas like Grant Road and the work that's been done on our north-south connections recently. That makes sense, but this piecemeal approach just doesn't make any sense at all. So I think, I don't know, the cash in lieu option may be the way to go so that we can get some of these major thoroughfares completed, and then as things develop, And the more kind of rural subdivision areas, as they urbanize, maybe that's the time to look at putting complete streets in those areas. Councillor St. Pierre.
A few things. One of a follow-up on something that Councillor Baton was saying earlier. He was talking about money, potentially coming from French Road to basically help build out Grant Road, for example. And it occurs to me that we actually have we probably have a situation where, for example, the same thing would be true of Whiff and Spit of a number of the arteries. So if we look at the different road cross sections, we have various arteries that lead to, local suburban and so on and so forth and all the rest. But the first roads that we'd want to build out and have, complete streetscapes with cycling paths and pedestrian availability are actually the ones coming off, say, Route 14 and then heading into those areas. And each one of those smaller streets is served generally by arteries and by other roads that are not complete. Now, obviously there's a link there, I think, between can we collect money that would actually directly benefit those residents? Because you can walk down your smaller road probably reasonably safe, but as soon as you get onto the arteries, you're more likely to get run over or more likely to have issues on your bicycle with getting run over. Feels like it's starting to sound like ACCs, the different, the alternate on amenity contributions. And I know that there's work happening in that direction already, but I feel like it wouldn't necessarily be a hard sell for a resident that's living served by an artery for that artery to actually be really good. At that point, you can spend the money even sooner. You can spend it faster. You can actually make sure that it's in the priorities of the district happens, potentially with DCCs in alignment, potentially with loans, potentially with our MFA credit line, and actually, start pushing for these arteries. But I assume that's already in the transportation master plan, what you're doing. So is that completely ridiculous? Then I have a follow-up question. Because it feels sensible, but I'm even missing something huge. And that's a question for staff or for our consultants or urban systems.
So I get that, Erwin, please jump in. But ultimately, it's why we're here today, like for what you're saying. So we're hearing in the suburban areas with local road cross sections, there's this huge cross section and it has lots of financial implications to it. We don't want to put financial implications onto those residents too heavy. So it comes down to basically the what and the where. What cross sections do you want to apply and where do you want to apply them? So there's three boundaries right now. There is the town center, there's Mosasuq, which is considered suburban, and then there's rural areas. So Dan and Beth can help me on guiding into the workshop and the conversation, but what needs to be discussed is where you want to make that suburban area more of a rural context. So now you're not requiring a complete build out, you're requiring a lesser build out, lesser dollar value. And basically, is that rural cross section for local roads good and satisfactory? And we've highlighted a couple of things for consideration within the report, but I'd love to hear council's take on other areas that are suburban that they wish to be local. So it's the what, the where, and decisions around the level of service and what needs to be, where that level of service is applied, what needs to be in those cross sections. And then from what I'm hearing, policy framework around cash in lieu so that it can be used not on the roads it's collected for, so it can be used for higher priority arterial and collector corridors. So,
and I'd just like to follow up. What I'm hearing is that there's also a need in some ways to have the money spent close to home. So if someone is actually doing the work and getting the money collected from the work has to happen. There has to be a direct link in terms of the amenities being built and people paying for them.
Typically, yes. So how I kind of view that is, you're doing a couple of these major projects. They're the priorities, your Phillips, your connector and stuff. These are multi-million-dollar projects, tens of millions of dollars. By no means is cash in lieu from a couple pocket areas on a suburban local street gonna substantially offset that. So it's a decision factor whether to make, whether you want to keep the money into that local street or if you want it to offset a very small percentage of a larger corridor project that's going to be paid for by the money that's basically provided by residents on that local street. Do you want to offset that huge $20 million cost by $500,000, or do you just extend the loan to complete that project for an extra $500,000 on on those major corridors, and then that gets paid for by all the taxpayers. It's hard. It's a hard decision factor, but we really need to focus on the what and the where, the service level, where that applies, and what is included in that cross section for that service level.
I have further question, but I think Councilor Beddoes has been waiting quite a while.
Councilor Beddoes.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's a couple of things here. I certainly, we need the discussion on rural and urban, and applying this across the board is not working. We know that. And you're looking for direction from us, which is good. We're going to work through that and give you some. The other thing that I'm really struggling with is definition. When somebody splits their present duplex just to strata it triggers a subdivision development standard. And that to me doesn't seem quite right to do that. We've had 3 instances now where they've come to us in the last 6 months where it's a simple thing, but because because of definition, it triggers a subdivision development standard. That's where we start running into a lot of problems. So I think, again, we need to look at the definition as what is really a subdivision and when do you trigger that standard? Because if somebody is just drawing a line down an already present duplex, myself, I don't think it should trigger that standard. But then again, even though we're sitting at this council table, we're lay people when it comes to that, and we need advice from yourselves, the community, and staff. But that seems to be pretty heavy-handed for somebody doing that. So I think there's a number of problems here. We're going to get looking at the definition of what they're doing on the outskirts of town, but we also, these ones are in the areas. We got the new OCP. It's not passed yet, but we define the areas where all the growth were, and this is from the people in the community. But just when it triggers it, a subdivision development standard for someone just drawing a line down their property doesn't seem to make sense to me. So that's where I'm having, is there something in the way things are defined that could be taken out of that? I don't know. That's the problem that I'm encountering. That's the staff. I see they're going to.
Yeah, sorry, through the chair to Councilor Beddoes, it's an easy one, and planning's in the room today, so they can jump in if I'm sort of incorrect on some of this stuff. But the requirements for doing 404 frontage improvements, that is at building permit, at subdivision. That bylaw is going to come forward to council for thorough review and consultation this summer. The biggest thing is subdivision should always require it. But again, the exemptions are what council wants to look at, because those are the decisions. If you want to make exemptions for 1 lot, 2 lot, 3 lot subdivisions, bylaw 404 in that consultation this summer, that's the place to look at it. Also, a big one is on building permits coming in. So typically for a lot of larger municipalities, especially in the lower mainland, they used to exempt 1 for 1. So you're taking a single family home, you're rebuilding a single family home, you are exempt from frontage improvements. They have changed that in a lot of places over the last 7 years, where they make them do the frontage improvements for all building permit applications, except they have an exemption set at anything less than $150,000 typically would not require your frontage improvements if you're doing alterations or decks or anything like that. In terms of the duplexes that are getting strata title conversions, that is under that act. It is a council separate policy from bylaw 404 that says council will have the opportunity to ask for offsite improvements during the time of a strata title conversion. It's not in 404 that says that. That is a complete separate policy of council, that one amendment to that policy could basically say you don't have to ask for frontage improvements for those. But because the policy framework says that, we then say, hey, the frontage improvements that council should ask for are in alignment with the subdivision and development standard bylaw. But strictly, that is a small piece of policy framework that council has under strata title conversions. You can make that go away, or you can take them as case by case and ask for the frontage improvements if you want. We'll put forward what they should be for that area, and you can ask an applicant to do them or not. But then you got to be very careful for consistency, because we saw it on the last 2 that came out. One person was made to do it, and then the next person was not made to do anything. So it's sort of being consistent with that and having the policy that you want to see, if you want that opportunity to ask for those or if you don't, but that can be dealt with completely separate from 404. In terms of when frontage improvements are required, we are going to thoroughly deal with that in the consultation and review of bylaw 404. There's one page that lays out the exemptions for subdivisions and for building permit. And that's what we really need council's direction on when we bring the 404 forward for consultation.
Follow up? Counselor, Chair, I'd just like to respond because it was my question. Could I just?
Okay.
Thank you for that. And I think you've gotten the message. Staff has, and that's what you're here to find out from us. So I look forward to us working through that and getting some resolution to that sort of annoying problem that's coming up. And I would think the expertise of the staff can bring us something forward as recommendations. So as long as everybody's listening and working to the common end, I think we can get there. So thank you very much for your report.
I think Mr. Casey would like to say something. Yeah. Judging by your body language.
It might have been a few questions back. I honestly don't have anything else to add. I think I did just want to kind of flag, we had sort of 3 parts to the session that we were hoping to work through. So very happy to kind of entertain questions of discussion now or start to sort of I'll say that some of the next 2 segments that we had queued up are a bit more less away from the past and more onto what the solutions might be. If we're keen to get there.
I like solutions. Councillor St. Pierre.
Yes, I'd like, this is for staff and as you're continuing with the presentation, you don't have to answer this right now. I've heard a lot about built out areas and people, sometimes take a look around the neighborhood and they figure it's built out. I know that, for example, when there's a financial incentive, someone might take down the old house and put a much bigger one down. If there's a financial incentive, then, literally you put a line across, that's what we call subdividing. And now you've got 2 lots and you start building out more. I'd like, as you're progressing, how do you make those calls in terms of what the future is going to look like in a particular rural area or so on and so forth? Because I think that's something that also council struggles with. The idea that, I heard this in one of our last discussions. Is it our job to foresee the future? I would suggest it is to try and foresee or to leave it to our staff and plan to do so. But how is that happening? Is it adequate? What does it look like? And how are those decisions in terms of what services for the future are wanted? So as you're progressing, if you please just let that flow. Thank you.
Councillor Bateman.
Okay, before you get into the next phase of the presentation, I just wanted to point out in the Saanich Active Transportation Plan passed in January, within the document, there is a list of 87 roads divided up into low, medium, high priority or complexity, then priority settings, the length of these roads, and descriptions of what would be planned. So that is one way to move forward, is to get right into the granular detail of our road network. And it's not a huge road network. It's something that potentially we could do, and we'd have this guide. So we would know French Road South, for example, in the TMP, it is in fact identified as a future key corridor. And so my vote might have changed if I'd been clear that in fact that connection to Beaton is going to be happening, and perhaps that sidewalk to nowhere would be a short-term sidewalk to nowhere, because over time that will build out as dictated by the transportation master plan. Anyway, this document is very clear.
So just for clarification, I'm hearing almost a next step, and please help me, of a TMP. So essentially taking the TMP we have suggested for maybe a midpoint review next year, building on the TMP, looking at the arterial collector and connectivity routes, and basically putting almost a road atlas together. And similar, this is the street, this is what's going to happen on the street, this is what side the sidewalk goes on, this is the decision, so people can flip to that and know right away.
Yeah.
We could definitely consider that going forward next year, and Beth and Dan can probably elaborate on it a bit more.
Absolutely. Very happy to shed a bit of light on the Saanich experience too. Beth and I were actually the consulting team leads on that one. Another one I might point you to is Central Saanich did an active transportation plan about 3 3 years ago, similar, call it a transportation capital project list. Short, medium, long term. I think we've been in sort of, in the room when those lists were being developed and toggled and sort of the financial aspect considered about what might be realistic given the pace of growth in those communities. Well, I think that would be a very, a good exercise to undertake here. And I think we can share some of the, I guess, the lessons from those communities in doing that.
That would be good, I think. So there's another phase of this meeting coming up is
Something like that, capital list or an implementation plan, sometimes a detailed implementation plan. Could be something that would be included in the transportation master plan review. If that were to be occurring in 6 months, it would give an opportunity to kind of evaluate or monitor the successes or what's been implemented since this plan was written, and also kind of maybe rejig some of the priorities or whatnot through the engagement process as well. It's not an outlier to include something like that in a transportation master plan. In some communities, it's really about being in line with what their community might be able to afford to actually implement over a shorter period and be kind of in line with their financial resources. And also provides, in some cases, a really great tool to help guide, grant applications or other types of funding.
I might add too, if I could, just sort of looking back almost 5 years on when the TMP was complete, like a little bit of a pat on the back to the district here in terms of how much progress has actually been made in 4 something years. We do these plans in all sorts of communities, and you would be in the top 5% in terms of progress made after, say, a 5-year time frame after a TMP has been developed. And so, but to the point of a TMP update or refresh, because you've done a fair bit, it's probably a very wise move to crack it back open and check off the things you've done and then reprioritize what's still to be done.
Just to build on that a bit more, and I know Beth alluded to it, something we got to be really cognizant of is financial resources. Yes. So essentially, there's only so many capital projects that the district can afford. I take those TMP priority projects, Parks and Trail priority projects, and plug them into the 5-year financial plan. But they're also plugged into basically a 5 and 10-year development cost charge program, because those are essentially, these are projects that are going to need to be realized because of the amount of development that's undergoing in Sooke. So initially the plans are done, there's figures put to those plans, and then we start designing them. And then the figures, they go up and they go up substantially. And we're going through minor updates right now that'll be brought forward to council for consideration to the DCC program. And that's only including basically high priority projects that have been taken from the TMP and the Parks and Trail Master Plan and put into that development cost charge program. Right now, there's probably only about, like, the majority of the TMP projects are in the development cost charge, but we have only skimmed the surface for the parks projects that are into the DCC program. There is absolutely no storm projects in the DCC program except for the master plan development, because it's the one missing link. The stormwater master plan we have not done yet for Sooke. So when that gets done, there's going to be also millions of dollars of projects, because a lot of the storm infrastructure is also falling apart in Sooke, and that will be split in the DCC program between developer contribution and municipal contribution for people paying their fair share. But what I'm getting at is even another piece like ACC is one. I don't believe sidewalks can be included in ACC contributions, but if there are additional ACC projects, that is going to bring DCCs up even more. Having an active transportation project or master plan on top of a transportation master plan is going to give us another $10 million in projects. Right now, we can't even fund like 20% of the parks projects going into the DCC. So we got to really check when we're doing the plans and putting them together as to what is realistic, what's financially achievable, and let's make something realistic that we can actually achieve in these plans, which we're trying to put forward right now. But sometimes creating more projects, it sounds great, but it's not great if we can't achieve them.
Anything further from council here? So it says here that public input is to follow each item. Would this be considered an item?
I would not consider this an item, but because it's committee of the whole, perhaps now would be an appropriate time to see if there is any members of the public who would like to speak before we go on to our next topic.
Okay, so I'll invite members of the public to,
Yes, there will be a chance after the presentation as well.
so is there anyone who would like to speak now? I see one. So,
Sorry.
sorry, you can,
Thank you. Ellen Lord, I have quite a few questions. One, first of all, who wrote the 404 subdivision plan? Who did that? Urban Systems or staff?
I can't.
We're
answer.
doing the new one. I don't know who did the last one.
Okay. So looking at this plan here, I see the upside down triangle showing walking first, biking, busing, and car. So cars are last on the list. And if you're in a rural area and you want to get into Souk, well, actually, sometimes you can walk faster than you can get into Souk these days. But I have questions with, first of all, what you were talking about with the rural areas, because I totally oppose putting sidewalks and such into rural areas. And the cost of doing that. The cost of doing that is not the only thing. The cost of putting a sidewalk in there, a boulevard, irrigation, using water that we don't have that's precious, and to irrigate trees and grass that we don't have to have there, and also electricity to put up lights. I'm looking, if you can visualize this, going up Ludlow Road and up to Basin View. So every once in a while, there's a subdivision might happen on those lots, as in Ludlow and Laidlaw. So you put a sidewalk on both sides and boulevards and both sides of Laidlaw and Ludlow to nowhere, because there's covenants there. You can't go across the river there. There's covenants, you can't build there. Going up Basin View, so you put up more sidewalks. So what you're doing, because I live at the bottom of it, what you're doing is pushing water down, and then you've got a stormwater plan. Well, then the water goes out into the ocean instead of going into the soil, because it's going out to the ocean, because you got a stormwater plan to take it away, because you're putting in cement sidewalks, you're putting in boulevards, you're putting electricity, you're building infrastructure that we don't need. That, for instance, I know the lights flashing.
Thank you for that. So that's time.
Okay, you have to keep coming back. I know. Okay.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Come on up.
This is Helen. I live in Souk. A question maybe for the next segment, but I was looking at the cross sections for the roads, and they have, you know, depending on what it is, it's a connector, it's 20 meters, or if it's something, I think it goes up to 30 or 25. And I was just wondering, is the road allowance actually there for all the streets that say that they're connectors and they have 20 meters? I went out and did this kind of Mickey Mouse thing with a tape measure, and it seemed like it wouldn't fit on my street. So that was my overall question.
Mr. Carter.
Through the chair to council, just to address like the second speaker today. No, the road allowances don't always exist, and that's why we put these plans forward. They show what the road allowance would need to be for the complete build out. And at time of subdivision is when the district can secure the remaining amount that they need from each of the properties. So that's how that's addressed. And to address Miss Luer's comments in terms of the Woodlands area and a lot of the Gatewood residential area, further in Urban's presentation, as well as in the report I prepared for council, that is sort of one of the suggestions, but we're looking for council's direction on that. But it's essentially changing the standard of the Gatewood residential area, which is your Woodlands area and all those streets, and changing it from a suburban to a rural context, so that basically when people are developing, they're putting in a rural context, which is in alignment with the rural local cross sections. And we've even introduced one more local rural cross section that's in alignment with some of the variances we've been seeing, which basically just reduces the width of the road a little bit minimum, but puts a gravel walking trail along the side of the road. So we were trying to sort of guide a possible solution for council's consideration from what we've seen, but we're looking for council's direction on this. And I think there'll be some more valuable information in the rest of the presentation here from Urban Systems.
Thank you for that. Any other first-time speakers? Okay, with that, I'm gonna just hold off on public comment until we're done with the rest of the presentation from the consultant. So I'll invite the consultant back up to continue with the presentation.
Thank you. Onwards.
Okay, so I think the next section, we really wanted to start talking sort of to date for the last hour or so, we've been talking about the TMP and some of how the TMP implementation has been going. We kind of wanted to turn the corner and talk more specifically about the cross sections that are found in the previous and the proposed new SDS 404 bylaw. So Beth introduced right away the sort of I don't think it's news for the group here, but the difference between the TMP, which is more of kind of a visionary and guiding document, versus 404, which is actually a regulatory document. And so that is our TMP articulates what we would like to see with respect to infrastructure and servicing. 404 is our requirement for what will be required as development comes forward. So it really is where the I guess the rubber hits the asphalt, so to speak. A cross section. So there's a series of, I think it's 8 cross sections in the SDS bylaw. They correspond with the different street classifications. So your arterial, collector, local, and then typically correspond also with the context in which they're going to be applied. So town center, urban/suburban area, or rural area. And those areas correspond with a service area map, which has a boundary that shows which is town center, which is urban, and which is rural. Cross sections themselves, and there's the sample urban suburban collectors is on the screen in front of us. So it does all sorts of things. To the previous comment, it lays out what the required right-of-way width will be. And so if that right-of-way width isn't in place, a subject of approval, of development approval, will be widening out the public right-of-way to achieve that full right-of-way width. Cross sections also dictate the types of facilities we want to see within the street. And so again, that varies based on like area or context, as well as the street type or classification. It lays out the functional layout and the required dimensions. So how wide must a travel lane be, or a sidewalk be, or a boulevard be? So there's a lot, you know, it just kind of looks like a visual there on the screen, but there's a lot behind that in terms of what is being laid out or set out as an actual requirement through the cross section. One of the things that's kind of inherent in this exercise about envisioning required cross sections is the striking a balance between how much sort of width you can ask for, how much right of way you can ask for, and the functions that we're trying to achieve within those rights of way. And so the graphic on the screen is sort of helping to, I don't know if it's providing any solutions here, but maybe highlighting the problem is there's a lot of requirements on space. And with that, costs to build these facilities within the limited rights of way that we have. So what we're trying to strike the balance of in the cross sections that have been presented in the TMP and now in the 404 bylaw is those facilities that are most needed based on the intended function of that street, whether it's a major street or a minor street, and which area of the community it's found in. Is it a town center area? Is it an urban area or rural area? And so that's really the intent behind the way these cross sections have been developed, is to make sure that we're balancing the need for these facilities with realistically the space we have available within those rights of way. And I think this slide might be redundant now, but I think what we're understanding from the group is really the challenge is, you're building out your town center streets. You've made a lot of progress, quite honestly, on your arterials and collectors. But where the kind of the friction comes in is what's happening on these local roads, and sort of the difference in context between what might be applicable on an urban or even a town center local road versus what logically belongs on a rural local road. And so that's really what we came here to understand. And I think what we've heard so far too is that's the crux of the discussion here, is around these local roads and the context for these local roads. So we wanted to just highlight first the local road cross sections that were in the TMP and are sort of the basis for the most recent version of STS bylaw. I guess importantly, what's shown in the cross section for the urban rural is travel lanes, obviously, where vehicles would travel, and the potential for on-street parking in situations as well. Boulevard or stormwater management opportunities at the roadside, and then sidewalks on one, and in certain cases on both sides. And so that's just generally speaking what's in the local urban cross section. And then I think if we go rural local, obviously these are meant to be applied in more rural, sort of less dense contexts, areas where more than likely like a more limited amount of development is occurring. And rather than some of the sort of more urban features with curb and gutter and on-street parking and that sort of thing, we're more looking at travel lanes with shoulders paved and then gravel shoulders, and then drainage features at the edge as well. And so these are what's were in the TMP and what's been brought forward for the more recent STS bylaw. So what we wanted to do, we sort of came here understanding that there was concern over either the level of service, sort of the extent and maybe the cost of the facilities that was being required through these local road cross sections as part of the challenge here. So we did a bit of a cross comparison to some other sort of peer or comparable communities. We skipped over the Saanaches and City of Victorias and just kind of focused in on communities that might be a little more representative. And sorry, yes, good point. And which have been updated in the last 5 years, so more recently. It's the ones that we don't want to model ourselves off communities that might have a 20-year-old bylaw. So we wanted to look forward a little bit in that sense. So just a list of the communities that we cross compared, and what we really wanted to do was cross compare urban local requirements in Sooke to urban local requirements in these other communities, and rural local requirements in Sooke to rural local in other communities as best we could. And so we kind of grabbed them all, made kind of a spreadsheet, and just cross compared quite literally the facilities and the dimensions for those facilities that are required across the other communities. And generally what we found was that your requirement for 18 meters for a local road is quite common. We do see as limited as 15 or maybe even lower in certain communities in constrained locations. We do see as high as 20. Typically for locals, but 18 is quite common. And so we're kind of, we'll say, on the mark from that respect. What we see for urban locals in most other communities is a requirement for sidewalks on either one side or two sides. And so what's been laid out for Sooke is one side as a minimum, plus a second side in proximity to schools, parks, commercial areas, that sort of thing. So one or two. And we found that that's relatively consistent with what we're seeing in other communities. We actually quite like I guess we authored it, so maybe but we kind of quite like the way it's one side required and then a second side if the surrounding context and land use dictates it. But that seems to generally line up with what other communities is doing. And then in almost all cases, boulevards are required in urban areas. That might take the form of planted boulevard with street trees. It might take the form of a stormwater management feature, but that space is set aside in almost all cases. Looking specifically at the local rural comparison, a lot of the same principles apply. What we did see is that, so in Sooke, there's not a requirement for what's been laid out is there is no requirement for a sidewalk in rural areas. We were seeing that that is in select other communities that they have included the requirement for a sidewalk. Some cases that takes the form of a concrete sidewalk above curb and gutter, like we might see in a more urban setting. More cases it takes the form of kind of like a footpath, like an asphalt footpath. But regardless, that facility is there and is required. So that's kind of what we take from the comparison to other communities. I think it helps ground truth. The question around, are we asking for, too much, or is the requirement for some of these sort of more urban facilities in a more suburban context asking for too much? And so we're able to pull some takeaways from that comparison. And I think just bringing it back to the, which Beth highlighted earlier in the presentation, was around the TMP shaping priorities, about this idea of building out complete streets and trying to build in facilities for all ages and abilities, and the modal priorities or modal hierarchy that was identified earlier. Just kind of really, again, using this as a, I guess, to shape and to influence how these SDS bylaw cross sections might look. This is still top of mind. So we do understand that we've talked about it for the last little while here too, that there's been some challenges around, I guess, feeling that the requirements that are placed on some of these more outlying, call them rural, call them suburban contexts, that the requirements that are being placed on them might be too onerous. And so that variances or relaxations have been granted in certain cases. And so I think we did want to highlight some of the, I don't know if it's concerns or sort of considerations around that, and the group may already kind of be alive to this as well, but inconsistent application does lead to inconsistent street design. And so we are left with these streets that may have often as pedestrian facility part of it and not in others. We do see that in other communities as a challenge as well. It does slow down the development process. It takes time from council, it takes time from staff to properly process these requests. And for the applicants, there's a more time, but also an element of uncertainty that comes with that as to whether they're going to be held to what the requirement is, or whether the relaxation might be granted. And that can actually be quite, I guess, meaningful in terms of them considering the validity and of the application and the ability to move forward. And then I think the last item we had on the screen, and I think we touched on this already, but is sort of this, where the relaxations are granted and the facilities aren't built, or the monies to build the facilities aren't captured, the community is left with the burden of, if that street is to be built out as envisioned, the costs come from the community. So I think we had a few questions we wanted to pose. I do believe we've kind of touched on a lot of this in the discussion already, but maybe I'll pose the questions, and then just with the material we just presented around the SDS bylaw specifically, would welcome any kind of general feedback as well. So the questions we had scoped up: what specific aspects of the existing cross sections are problematic? How could local cross sections be improved? What recent changes in Sooke may have necessitated these updates? And what are the trade-offs that concern you when we talk about level of service and facility requirements? So I think we've probably touched on a lot of these questions, but I think we'll open it up for the group.
Thank you, Councillor St. Pierre, and then Beddoes.
Interestingly enough, I had a couple of people this week come to me and ask, why are your bike lanes so sucky? Is paint going to stop someone from running me over? I had to point out before, we didn't have bike lanes at all, and they should really appreciate bike lanes at all. But that aside, this seems like a good time to ask whether or not it might be possible to actually put, the low bumpers or something along certain sections, if that's what we're looking at, a built out cross section, especially near parks and schools and so on and so forth, or you know, what that might look like, what it might look like to do it on a limited scale, potentially to convince the public it's not the end of the world, or maybe to remove them afterwards, but basically to test it out. Just wanted you to talk a little bit about that piece. Oh, and bus stops. We don't have buses, but maybe if we build the bus stops, the buses will come.
Sure, I don't know that we have an answer to number two there. But it's a good question. I mean, number one, absolutely. And I would probably suggest that if you're refreshing the TMP in the next year or two, it sounds like that might be ideal sort of conversation for your community around the desire for those physically separated cycling facilities. I think you've got, in the last 5 years since the TMP was developed, you've got some great examples now out in the broader Southern Island that we can point to say, you know, do we like this treatment? Do we like that treatment? There's probably Saanich, Victoria, Colwood's getting into it. And we're seeing others as well. I would say presenting a full picture around what it cost, but also and benefit, but what might come with building facilities like this would be a good idea. And I maybe pull the example of maintenance. Right now, road sweeping, you sweep your roads, you sweep the entire road. As soon as you introduce that curb, you need a second pass, often with a specialized maintenance vehicle, to keep those facilities clear. And so just items like that, where I would, I guess, encourage that the full picture is presented about what it means. But I think that's a great idea and something I would highly encourage. Yeah.
For the second question in terms of bus stops, so all our cross sections right now for the arterial and collector corridors, which primarily you're going to see bus stops on, they do accommodate that because it's essentially in the boulevard area where they could be introduced or additional parking could be introduced in the future. So I have meetings every 2 months with approximately with BC Transit. They're shared all our designs for all our corridors that we're 80% designed on, and any implementation they're given first shot at basically saying, where would you like a bus stop in terms of your long-term transit plan? So that is in the works, and it always is getting looked at.
Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I think I go back to what staff has put together for us here. And I guess what we're looking for is to better define areas to see what standards apply. It's sort of vague at the moment that we go to gateway residential, you know, one side of the road as opposed to the other side of the road, which is a different standard, I believe. And I go back to the recent OCP work group where we took the map from this transportation master plan on page 8, and we better defined where the different growths were expected, and we got that from the community. So I think in order to accomplish that, and this is what staff's got here on committees, they're looking for some direction from us. I think that we have to sit down again with the what we gathered from the OCP and this standard, and just draw some lines where these apply. And I mean, I remember gateway residential, and Ms. Lewis could probably put some input on that too, is you know, one side of the road was different from the other side of the road. So we need to be very clear where we expect these standards. I wish it was very simple that I could just draw you a little map where I think it is, but my other colleagues may differ with me considerably. So somewhere along the line, we have to do that. And I think that's what you're seeking as well. So I think we're on the same page. It's a matter of just how do we get it done. I'm not so sure we can draw those boundaries today, but I'm willing to try. So most of the questions I think we have go over. You have a very good, clear idea of our frustration. Staff seems to have an extremely good idea of where the stumbling blocks are and offering some possible solutions. So I think we've worked to that end. But again, this has been a good exercise getting us all on the same page and where we need to move forward. And we do need to move forward. And we're in limbo land right now. We need to get some things done. So yeah, thanks.
Councillor Bateman and St. Pierre.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I'm sort of running short here, but I will say this road atlas that I mentioned earlier would be a great way to really dig into those areas of the community growth area that are arguably rural, right? So that we could apply these this new cross-section you're offering today as well. Thank you, Councillor St. Pierre, for mentioning the divided laneways for pedestrians and cyclists. What is the word? Buffered sidewalk, excuse me. And it's interesting to me. I had an experience. I picked up my agenda on Sunday. I drove out of here. There was an electric bike in front of me, and she moved along. I was very hesitant to pass. It's right on this road here on the picture, which I think is a DCC road, right? Otter Point? It was not. Okay, so it's quite a narrow road. So until we got over the top of the hill and descended down into the new section, Wadhams down to Church, where there is a painted, at that point, I felt comfortable to pass her. So I can see the value of those painted lines for cyclists. At the same time, I've heard from a number of people in town who do ride, and there aren't a lot of them, but they'd have appreciated a barrier at that point, a buffer of some kind along that section. I think that's all I got.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I just wanted to follow on something that Mr. Casey, I think it said. And that's in terms of the experience of the people actually going through the process of, getting a development permit or building permit. And that's that I hope that whatever we decide, we're just really careful about the variances in the future, because I know that I've had people complain bitterly to me about the process. If council was just going to give me the variance anyway, why did I have to go through this hell on earth type of thing? I think we have to be aware that regardless of what happens, our staff ends up being painted like with this brush of, I had to go to council for some common sense, even though they actually just have to follow the rules, and there are rules. So I'm hoping that at the end of the day, we're just really careful that whatever we have is what we want, and that we're extremely careful about the variances, because otherwise we're just creating more delays as people decide, okay, well, this person got it, now I want it too. Staff gets, again, a bad rep and all this. Let's just be really good about it. Once it's done, I hope we can stick with what we have.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of troubles me a bit is that whenever somebody comes forward with they want to stratify their duplex or whatever, that sort of thing, I think it's important to differentiate between developers and homeowners who are just trying to make a few bucks to put food on the table, and because it's not necessarily the same thing. And so in established neighborhoods where somebody has a suite, they want to stratify it or something like that, it's not the same as a developer coming in and they're in the business of developing to well, also to put food on the table, but to put food on many tables. Sorry, Mr. Carter.
So, through the chair to council, so that, like I previously alluded to, that one can be dealt with right away by council with one resolution to change council's policy on requiring offsite improvements for strata conversions. That is done. It's not required under the subdivision and development standards bylaw. That's a separate policy of council. Did council have any questions on sort of what staff has put forward for consideration within the report? Because it does address, I believe it does address some of the concerns anyways that council has, but if there's any specific questions on that, as well as the ones that are posed by Urban Systems, that would be helpful. Oh, you got next one? Never mind, I'm skipping ahead.
Thanks. Sorry. Councillor Pearson, did you have something? And then I'll go to St. Pierre.
Well, I think the specific aspects of the existing cross sections are problematic. I think it's the density can vary by application, and the cost therefore changes the scope. That's one of the problems that I've seen. But then, you know, I hear a partial solution over there. I think that, and then the changes that or the recent changes that need to be updated to me is that we've fed a lot of our newer developments through existing road network without any consideration to those base roads. The road Beaton Road comes up and it's badly beaten as an example. We've done nothing to improve that road in the cross sections. When we're having that development in there, we should be somehow collecting DCCs or do something to extend those cross sections into those, because it feels that, you know, you're crossing over sort of no man's land to get to a way better standard in the new developments, which take care of themselves. The new developments take care. So the struggle for me is in the existing neighborhoods. That's that, you know, do we have the right to implement the these cross sections? Of course we do, but we better get it right. And the road atlas, I think, is probably some of that key to that, is say, okay, well, this is where we expect that. And then put a line in the sand where what development, you know, what size of development or what's the net gain in the density. I think that has a lot to do with it. Contiguous, the word contiguous also applies to it, because these sidewalks that are going from nowhere to nowhere are frustrating. I personally have put in between 15 and 20 lots into soup of my small properties that I've owned over the years. And to, you know, some of my counselors have said, you make money, you don't make money, because the parent property actually decreases in value. There's a lot of factors. People say, oh, yeah, you know, you get another lot, it's worth $300,000. But if you're spending $150,000 or $175,000, but you're also decreasing your parent property, there's a lot of considerations on those smaller subdivisions. And people have invested in our community for years. They get a false sense of, okay, there's a $300,000 lot sitting next to my house. But when you tell them the actual cost, it's going to be $200,000 and 18 months of torture, because it's 100% torture. And we're seeing single lot subdivisions sitting here for 2, 3, 4 years with no decision, no political decision, no staff decision, because we're caught up there. So those are the places that are causing this problem. The big developments, they don't give us any problem. They know up front, I got to build a road to this front. The road standards are good. Okay, I'll build it. And they do the math. They have people in their organizations. They have accountants that say, yep, we can buy that and go ahead. The mom and pops, people like me, you can't figure it out. And it's a maze of pitfalls and delays and setbacks. And so that's where I struggle with the whole thing. And yet everyone wants a sidewalk in front of their house. I could tell you that I would have rather contributed to Grant Road sidewalk that I've subdivided my first property in 1982. I would have taken all of my DCCs and put them onto Grant Road gladly. And so would my wife, because she had to push a buggy up there in 1982, and it's still a goat trail. 34 years later or 44 years later, Grant Road hasn't been fixed. The DCCs haven't provided any improvement. So I don't know. So we've got lots of stuff right, to your point, and it's the new developments that are right. It's the existing within them that's the problem, and people's expectations. Comment, that's it.
Councillor St. Pierre and then Mayor Tate.
I just wanted to comment on the, I think that Councillor Pearson is pretty much bang on. It's about the previously developed areas where we have to make decisions, and we have to come up with something that works for everybody. And again, I'm going to go back to whatever works and seems fair. Ideally, we shouldn't be drawing a line between, you know, big developers and small developers. If you're making money on your property, you're making money on your property. But at the same time, if you're not making much money at all, and if it's a complete hassle, first of all, how can we make it less of a hassle? And that's about, you know, the dark, that's about improving our process. But then at the end of the day, what's a fair contribution, you know, for example, on something like Grant Road, or a collector that actually makes a difference to the people that are going to be investing in that area. So I think that those are the questions that we need to ask. And I think we're more on the same page than not, fortunately. I would also say that I have a concern that we're careful, you know, when we look at new homeowners versus, you know, new property owners versus old property owners. The older property owners didn't pay as much for the property. The new one comes in, you know, maybe pays a lot more for the lot. But then we need to treat these people fairly and relatively the same, because the person who pays 300 or 400,000 for the lot shouldn't be penalized. They're already getting hosed by the real estate market. They don't need an additional, ding over and above the person who's lucky enough to have bought in like 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're also being fair to everyone as we're moving this forward.
Mayor Tate, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks everyone for your comments. Just I'm looking at the questions here, and I'll just throw some thoughts out there. I think some of it has been captured now, so thank you for that in the report and what's to come. I like the idea, and it was mentioned somewhere about like seeing the updates to the transportation master plans. So we're seeing things come off, and then also what might need to come on next. And then how does that get prioritized with the funding formulas, whether they be, okay, we have the DCs, we need to borrow X, this is grant, we didn't get the grant or we did, and where we just need to borrow to do something. So we see where those fit. Sometimes like applying the road cross sections to our community and then comparing them to another municipality, it doesn't speak of ground truthing to me. So an example, and Councillor Pearson raised this with Beaton Road. So where does Beaton fall into this? All they're seeing is the impact of development, but are they in this plan, the residents there? What about Rhodonite in Helgeson? Or Points Phillips? Okay, we see that, we're talking about that, but all of these neighborhoods have been dramatically altered by development and the traffic passing through. In some instances in agendas past, we've talked about future connections. So at one point, a future connection from Pasco to Sun River, and then the road selected was one that is currently a cul-de-sac. And in this plan, it shows a cul-de-sac with no sidewalks or nothing because it's a cul-de-sac. But now we're looking at potentially altering. Now I know it's for emergency, it's sitting, but their residents were upset when we saw that happen, and they're not in this plan, but suddenly we're changing that neighborhood or that section of a neighborhood dramatically, even talking about it at council. So it's almost that all future connections have to take what is on the ground into play. So that would mean then a connection to a road in Sun River that currently has sidewalks. In terms of how, let's see here, where is it here? The local cross, how could local cross sections could be improved? I think that's identifying, or how I'm reading that, is when a development occurs and it impacts one like Beaton or another road. How does that road get improved or even captured? Or does it? To me, that's where it looks like they just fall into general taxes. And also, it's looking at what's coming. So we recently, a decision was made to put more density onto Phillips Road, but Phillips Road and the current crosswalks are not going to be upgraded in any way, shape, or form because of that development that's happening. But there will be more traffic. Residents living there will drive one way or they'll drive the other to visit the river and points beyond, but there's no impact. So those crosswalks become more dangerous as a result of that density impact. And then I think when it comes to where at least I've gotten a bit stuck with council decisions is reading through the reports, everyone, I think almost the majority of council will spend time on site. And that's, I think, to an elected perspective is ground truthing. Now you're standing on the land and looking at what's coming from a very layperson perspective. And a lot of technical jargon gets thrown at you that you may or may not, I don't fully all grasp or comprehend, and then expected to make a decision. So the acronyms need to be spelt out. If there's an alternative, I think the impact of that alternative needs to be described more fully, and decisions previously made need to be shown. So when we hear, oh, we took land from one, but not the other, that wasn't anywhere in the report. Didn't know that. Heard about it in the meeting, didn't know it beforehand. When was that taken? Why was it taken? How? Was it pre-incorporation? And anything post that we should have a record of or a resolution of or something, or was it inherited from before? That might help provide more context, because to others' points, some things take a really long time. Grant Road being one that we barely touched in the time that I've been here. So I feel that we're getting here, and it's just having the conversations over, you know, as we need to have them to make sure we understand what we're trying to achieve. But sometimes it's like, what is the problem we're trying to solve with this? What are we actually trying to do here? And I think we need to be respectful and fair, regardless of the scale of the development. Thank you. Oh, in terms of trade-offs is, well, if we don't do this, we're not going to get anything. Well, no, we can still do things, but I think maybe then we borrow or we do this anyway, but how we're funding something may look differently, or who we put that financial burden on. And then, so when I hear, okay, well, then we're never going to do this or not going to do it. Well, no, we still need to do these things. It's just the financial burden may need to be carried by all. Because, and it, you know, rather than just one or a few. Thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
This is a question again for staff and consultants. One of the things that's come up as an issue in terms of actually making this a fair process for pre-existing areas is a non-negotiable price tag that could be attached, for example, to improving arteries, or, you know, let's say that we go through an atlas, we have the appropriate roads that are associated with a catchment area. Within that catchment area, you're gonna have a certain number of people developing over a period of time, probably, you know, more with the new legislation from the province and so on and so forth, and development pressures. As that money starts potentially coming in, what's that amount going to be? We know from, for example, from our affordable housing policy that we need to have it like ideally nailed down. We need it, you know, it should be like DCCs in some ways. We need to actually have, for example, how many lots do we expect to redevelop? What's a reasonable point? What's the cost of the project for improving the arteries? I mean, that looks like a DCC process in some ways. How far away are we away from being able to do something like that, that to me would be more or less ideal?
Through the chair to Councillor St. Pierre, that would be something we'd have to receive direction on from council and get a price to look at doing something like that as part of a midpoint review of the TMP and doing kind of a major overhaul on the document and adding to it. So we'd be potentially looking at something like that possibly next year if we had council's direction.
So what I haven't heard is it is impossible.
Anything's possible with
Well,
money and
no,
staff
no.
capacity. But yeah, I would guess it would depend on the priority for council to do. Sorry, there wouldn't be staff capacity to do this in-house. This is something we would have to get a consultant to undertake this work and the consultation and the engagement, all the calculations for kind of the starting point. If you're talking road atlas and then working its way down, that is a lot of technical work that I don't think staff would have the capacity to take on top of day-to-day and other.
And as Mr. Carter was saying, this would be part of a review of the TMP. Yes,
This would be a major addition.
major addition.
Part
to
of
the
a
TMP.
review of a TMP.
Okay,
So-
not just a review.
No, that's not a review. It's a major addition and there's a lot of moving pieces to it. And this is where it becomes challenging. So a road atlas is created. This is the standard you're going to build on this street, French Road, call it. You know what, based on this road standard, you are going to contribute this amount of money, which is equivalent to your frontage improvements. Yet we're going to go use that somewhere else to go build a major arterial collector that has totally different costs associated with it. So that's where like the logistics of it become very difficult, but we can solve that. That's something we can do. Just look for council's direction to do that.
Thank you.
Any Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, so thank you for this proposed new rural standard cross-section. It seems to be very logical. I noted, and I don't think it's always clicked in here, that these cross-sections are very much tied to speed limits. So this would be a 20 to 30 kilometer speed limit for any of the local road classifications. Do we in fact have those speed limits tied to these roads at this point?
I could let Beth and Dan speak to that, but I believe it would be up to 50 kilometers an hour, which is permitted within local roads and. Yeah, and just to address the previous comment I've heard, it's very easy to get the improvements on all these other streets like Grant Road West and like Beaton Road. Beaton Road is in here and it is in the DCC program at a small value right now, but it is in there and we're collecting money for it. If council wants to see these arterials built out more, right now, our priority, well, the priority of council and what we've been putting forward into our financial plan is the connector and Phillips and getting that connection made, which is $30 million avenue venture. We can collect money for these other ones. Grant Road, doing the improvements on Grant Road is a major arterial road. I would love to see the improvements done there. To build out Grant Road, you'd probably be looking at close to $40 million. I would love to put that into the DCC program because then we could start collecting substantial funds that could go towards that in the future. However, there's give and take. We put a major program like a project like that into the program now. That's going to triple your DCC rates or substantially increase them. So the cost it's ultimately going to fall somewhere. It just depends what direction we want to take on that and logistics going forward with it.
Speed limits?
So speed limit is not necessarily tied to street classification, local collector arterial. But the way we want to consider 50 kilometers an hour is the default speed limit unless posted otherwise. But we would ideally like to see some of those locals. Ultimately, it's about how fast people travel on those streets. We would love for people to be traveling 30 kilometers an hour on locals. Makes it a safe environment, especially where sidewalks and cycling facilities aren't being provided. It's a share the road kind of situation. Slower is better. It's a matter of what tools are needed to get vehicles to operate the way we would like to see them. If posting this reduced speed limit to 30K is the tool, then that might be an excellent way to go. Yeah.
Whole suite of traffic calming possibilities,
Yeah.
of course.
Anything further from council? All right, maybe we could take 7-minute break until 3:05. All right. So off you go then.
This is the last one.
Sure.
Do you have anything else after?
I gotta stay at 4:30. I can just be late,
Same turn.
kind of. The bosses are in town.
Oh, at the office too.
It's at, I don't know where it is, Courtney room?
Oh, sorry.
Magnolia.
It's 2 right now.
It's 3 right now.
There's not a chance you're gonna get that. Martin and Steve.
Okay, I don't know. So I'm gonna allow you to continue your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. So this is the last portion, and lots of opportunity for discussion following. In this portion, we are really going to be focusing on the what those cross sections are going to look like and where they could be applied. The focus here is going to be on the alternative that we are putting forward for discussion. One option of many for sure, but a starting point in the discussion and where we hope to be able to address some of the locations of the common variances recently. Sorry, is back to sleep again. There we go. Thank you. So again, that what will these local roads look like within the suburban and rural level of service areas, and then where the way we define the suburban, rural, urban, suburban, rural itself, that is ultimately something flexible that we would like to work through with you and have some thoughts around what best practices for doing so look like. So as a reminder, the existing rural local calls for 2 travel lanes, painted shoulders. This does not include any separated facilities for walking or cycling, but it does include that allocated boulevard width. As we just discussed earlier, it's really important to maintain that space for the various roles of these right of ways. Now, as far as a potential alternative rural local, we're calling it, this has been identified based on the variances that have been received recently in council, and would include a multi-use pathway or multi-use trail to accommodate active transportation. In this conceptual cross section you see in front of you, this is currently like a hard packed pathway, and it could apply to the Gatewood residential area or the Silver Spray comprehensive development area. Those have been identified again because of the recent variances that have been approved. Where cross sections such as this is applied is certainly up for some discussion and exploration. So just to compare to the current existing rural road, you'd basically be taking the 1.5 meter shoulders and allocating that space as a 3 meter multi-use trail on one side of the road, as you can see it highlighted here. So just for simplicity and consistency going forward, we'll call that the kind of the secondary alternative to a rural cross section. Where this would be applied, we're moving towards the where now. You see here is the kind of the current level of service roads in the map, which really we've got town center, suburban, and rural, huge swaths of areas. And we've heard many times there's a lot of nuance within the district as a whole. So moving forward, and these, my red mark boundaries on this are obviously to better align with the land use boundaries that are included on the map here. But for visuals, as I mentioned, it could apply to the Gatewood residential area and Silver Spray comprehensive development area as potential service areas for the secondary cross section that we've put forward. Now, we've already talked about the kind of land use designations in this one on the map in front of you. Here is the draft OCP. We also have the current OCP land use as well. Now, best practice for determining urban, suburban, rural is tied to land use. So something to keep in mind when you're selecting boundaries, the strong preference and certainly best practice would be to stick within distinct boundaries to define those service areas that would be receiving the cross sections that we would be putting forward. So those would be the suburban urban locals, a rural local, and then the secondary alternative at this point. This is the existing OCP land use map, just for reference. Similar boundaries here within the growth area. And then without going further into those boundaries, we certainly can and we should in this discussion opportunity. This discussion really should be focusing on the what and the where and the thoughts upon that initial cross section that's being put forth as an option in those two areas. I think maybe we'll stop there. The questions here on screen are ultimately prompts, but certainly considering what the criteria that council could be, you know, comfortable with, and understanding that the best practices would be the land uses that we've put forward on the maps there that are existing. So with that, I'm happy to go back to that secondary cross section if that's helpful for the conversation, but certainly hoping to focus on the where would be the appropriate application for the secondary cross section.
I think from my perspective, the where would be so in established neighborhoods where land assembly is occurring and actual real development is happening, that would be a good place to insist that we have the full build out of the cross sections. But I think where we're running into problems is where it's a single homeowner who wants to do a small modification to their land use of their residential lot. That's where these variances keep coming in. And I don't know if you have any comments on that. And one other thing, I keep hearing the Gatewood residential area, and what is it? Do we have a definition for that? Because we have a Gatewood Road. But I think you're
The brown area there is Gatewood residential, I think north and south.
Gateway,
Sorry,
okay,
Gary.
that's what I thought. but-
Sorry about that.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll go St. Pierre, Meadows, Pearson.
I was hoping to go back to the slide with the cross section of the roads.
Would you
Do
like to?
the first in the alternative? Okay, so my question is, I noticed that, you know, it's a little bit off from one to the next. So for example, if you look at where the actual road is positioned,
Mhm.
it doesn't look like, it looks like there's maybe, I don't know, 2 meters on the left-hand side, and sorry, 3 meters on the left-hand side, maybe 2 meters on the right-hand side in terms of the boulevard space. It looks to me like you'd have to shove the road over a little bit in order to make the alternative happen. Is that necessarily the case? Because I like the narrowing the road because that automatically has a traffic calming impact. Okay, I like the segregation of the bike lanes and the pedestrian path because that has other benefits as well. But if you have to shove the whole road over, that's less convenient. So if you could let me, what does that look like if you try and make it happen?
Sure. I guess immediate thoughts are in terms of like where we build in separation between a pathway and the roadway, separating people who are walking and cycling from the road. We would like to see more space between the trail and the road than sort of on the far side of the road. But I think where your question is going is sort of how that's then built out with a road that's no longer sort of centered in the right of way. I think like in a larger scale development where this is happening for over a longer length, that would be more achievable. I think in the sort of the single lot or just a couple lot scenarios, that's going to be more challenging. And so it could be a situation where the roadway is pulled back closer or to the middle of the right of way. And that boulevard space between pathway and roadway is just narrower than it's been shown on the screen.
Just to confirm what I think I'm hearing, it would be difficult with pre-existing roads, not necessarily impossible, but difficult. This would be easier to do if you're putting in a new road.
A new road or redevelopment over a sort of a long, like a larger site. Yeah. I think too, like, so typical in a SDS bylaw like this would be a series of, you'd have your typical they are called typical cross sections. We're looking at some of those right now. There's very often notations at the bottom that will explain some of the variations that might occur. Sometimes they'll say parking not needed where these land uses don't occur. A case like this, it might say, you know, typical cross section to be applied over longer lengths. Roadway may be centered on the right of way over shorter lengths. Things like that would help to highlight some of the variations.
Would this be a situation if what we wanted as the ultimate build out was, say, the secondary alternative, that we'd be looking for right of ways and so on and so forth to allow that in the future, even if we kept with the existing?
It could. Yeah, would it? Yeah, it absolutely could. Yep.
Just trying to figure out how you make this happen.
I think the biggest thing on that point is creating the space right off the bat, and then potential to come in later and provide that pathway or whatever the facility that's excluded off the beginning, but creating the space for it. Yeah.
Councillor Beddoes.
Thank you, Chair. I think for sure, gateway north and south, depending on which one of these OCP drawings, would be to a very rural standard. I think we've established that. The other part that Councillor Lajeunesse was referring to were the frustrations. We can handle that outside of this, you know, where somebody is straddling their lot and or just peeling off one lot. According to Mr. Carter, we can do that in-house with some changes. So I think most of the other friction has been in the Gatewood area, and there's still some contentions about Silver Spray. My concern about that is depending on the scope of what's being done. If it's a single lot, I don't have a big problem with, you know, not doing the whole street, but the one that came up recently was a 7-lot subdivision. So within that subdivision, I'd want to see a full standard. So I'd rather not just say everything out there is to a rural standard. It depends on what's happening out there. If it's a small people dividing off a house is one thing, but a 7-lot subdivision where they've taken everything off the land as it is now, that to me comes to a different standard. So that needs to be fleshed out when we get to that. But certainly the gateway is the one that I would be interested in. And the other areas, I think we're probably okay. These small lots, we're going to look after that through another process. So that's where I stand. Thanks.
Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, and I guess just following along with the other councillors' comments. So we would have to overlay that with the existing road profile in an application, because then, you know, we're building something here that would require a variance if we're looking at the existing, right? And then we're trying to get away from the variance discussion. So I'm kind of missing that linkage between the existing surface and again, the small subdivision. Maybe we can handle that a different process. So that's sort of a question to you. Sort of a question. Right?
Well, I think like with, again, typical cross sections, there's always some variation with how it's applied. My understanding was that the crux of the argument was around like the urban facilities being provided in a arguably not urban scenario or rural setting. And so if we liked the alternative cross section that we saw here, and it was sort of almost like a hybrid between an urban and a rural type treatment, we felt that was appropriate. There would always be, well, there could still be some variability in where that pathway sits within the right of way, how big that boulevard is. There's a typical, there's a standard, but there still can be some variability. I think that agreeing or coming to a kind of a consensus on the 2 or 3 different cross section types here would be a great step forward. Yeah. Versus, yes, there still might be a little bit of movement exactly on where that pathway might sit and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, and I got that sense. So I just, again, it felt like to me that then that presentation, we're going to have a gravel pathway from nowhere to nowhere, like our sidewalks, right? And I, you know, I hopefully that through this exercise, we eliminate these, you know, piecemeal approaches. The other thing is, and I personally would prefer, as opposed to the Gatewood, I would prefer the catalog of every road in Zug. I would like to look at, you know, the French Road North, those, as opposed to saying it's Gatewood only. I would like to look road by road by road. And I think council, it's not that onerous. We don't have that many roads. So that, as opposed to saying it's only in Gateway, because somebody could come along and want a great big development in Gateway. And therefore we are limiting ourselves if we overlay it with our current OCP. So just a thought.
Councillor Bateman and then St. Pierre.
Yeah, thanks for all those comments. I'm interested in Gateway. If someone came with a great big development, it would not fit the OCP. It doesn't have sewer connection. So we're to densify where the infrastructure exists. So more generally, I like us focusing in on these two areas here to start. The Gateway Residential, we had that application for Woodlands, and he backed onto Harbor View. And he, in fact, I think is going to be developing a gravel pathway or a chip or multi-use surface. I guess the key around that with this new cross section is those are much cheaper to build out, right? As opposed, obviously, so that makes it more feasible for future extension of the route. With Silver Spray, it's interesting to me. So in the staff report here, you're making a strong note here that this area will evolve into a high-end residential resort area, and the existing local roads classification standard is in fact appropriate for this area.
That's my opinion.
Yes, good. And of course, here in the TMP on page 45 under standard cross sections, the quote is, areas in the easternmost portions of Sooke and Silver Spray are primarily where rural standards will be applied. So there's a change of interpretation here, which is entirely your right, and council's right to, I guess it'll be back before us.
That's why I put it to you for a decision. Like I look at it, you know what, in a rural context now, does it make is it a problem? No, it's not. But what could possibly, if council decided to, and I'm saying it not necessarily will happen, but everything that's subdivided out there develops. You got high-end residential neighborhoods out there. When people start occupying them, or Silver or the Point goes, and an abundance of townhouses get put down there, and people start buying them, these are high-end, expensive places, and they will have families there. I'm just saying they could cause a problem in the future. Going, you know what? Why is this developed? Why didn't you not put sidewalks and streetlights coming down here? I don't have a crystal ball. I'm just making you aware of it. Right now, it could be interpreted as rural. It could stay that way forever, but there's a chance it could change. So you've got to consider these.
Yeah, so we'll continue that discussion at one of the future meetings, right? Yeah, and then west of the river in particular, that's where we need to get this road atlas figured out. Yeah, in particular. Anyway, I just note, you know, this 80% of Sooke doesn't have, Sooke roads don't have the sidewalks. I drove here today and I took a circuitous route up Maple, Pyrite, Beaton, no sidewalks anywhere. There is a little bit in front of the Prestige, in front of Councillor Pearson's project and a few others. So yeah, I'm heading off. Okay, thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I'd like to go back to the what slide, if we could. Sorry, the two cross sections. I just want to speak in favor of the second alternative. I'm thinking that this would probably, if we can come up with some good policy frameworks and some good ways of actually making that our ultimate build out objective, I think it would really suit motorists and pedestrians and cyclists. There aren't that many drivers who actually like sharing a road with a cyclist. They're generally kind of afraid of running them over and they don't want them swerving into them. Same goes for the pedestrians and cyclists. At the same time, if we're actually asking someone to build out the second cross section, we're looking at less asphalt. We're probably looking at a slightly lower cost. We'd have to get it right away for the path, but I think that would be a good compromise situation where it would probably suit, you know, the mom and pop and everybody else better, or honestly, anyone better. So I don't know how this works in terms of what Mr. Casey was saying and how do you actually make it go? But if that was our ultimate build out objective, I think that might be better for everybody. Realistically, if we want to make active transportation really, really appealing, separating cars from bicycles or actually having a 30-kilometer limit everywhere with traffic calming has to be considered. But this is a good step in that direction, I think. I'm just putting that out. It's more of a comment, but putting it out. Hoping that we move in that direction.
Just for clarification, unless Irwin speaks totally against this, it wouldn't be potentially replacing the cross section. You could have two, and both these cross sections would coexist. Our referrals from engineering would be in alignment with what was seen in the area, and to kind of address Councillor Pearson's concerns. So the one with the pathway is what we saw sort of in the area, but in the Woodlands area, but we have to come up with a typical cross section. Ultimately, if another development went in Woodlands and these were introduced, we would be referring on the secondary alternative. And of course, there is always some slight variances from typical that staff may be in support of, such as, you know what, we're doing a gravel trail and we're trying to get around these trees. So we need to meander the gravel trail, or we need to reduce the boulevard from 3 meters to 2 meters. Great. We can live with a 2-meter ditch for 10 meters, or we need to reduce it to 1 meter for 10 meters. Great. Pipe it in the culvert. It's okay. It fits the area. But ultimately, if someone was developing on Connie Road, we might refer on, you know what, do the existing standard for rural, because no one's developed out there. There's no trail out there. People use the road. There's 20 properties out there in total. Either could be applicable. So you could keep both of them as an option. We would be referring on one of them, and the applicants would go forward with proposing probably on one of them. We might be in a line, we might not.
Thank you.
Mayor Tate.
Thank you. So just to what Mr. Carter just said, I really appreciate that. So that's what I just value hearing that. I'm hearing the options, taking in the nuances of the land, the topography and the like, maybe different treatment depending on type of roots, systems, tree canopy, and all of that. Because sometimes what we've encountered before is this road standard needs to go in, you need to clear cut all these trees, and that isn't what we're trying to accomplish. So I like seeing the options, you know, or even a challenge, come up with something better than, you know, you never know, because the individuals who live there who may be doing things may have better options given what they've seen as use in the area. Just a question is, where and how do we introduce the conversation around traffic speed limits into this? Because a big push for having pedestrian safety is because of impact with vehicles. And so if everything is 50, you know, and on all of these roads, that seems really fast to me, right? And if you're entering a cul-de-sac, I mean, naturally, most people are respectful of where they are, but many, it only takes one, is not. And then while they were driving the speed limit, and the collision with the pedestrian is fatal, right? It's lights out. So how do we introduce that? Because that, in what conversation and what policy setting do we do that?
Anyone?
I'll let the transportation planners take this one, but my my 2 cents is it's difficult sometimes because schools are signed 30 kilometers an hour. If you go sign the rest of the streets at 30 kilometers an hour, I don't believe people will drive 30 kilometers an hour. And it comes down to how much enforcement are you going to do and how many feathers are you going to ruffle in the process. But I'll turn it over to the experts on this one.
Thank you. Speed limits, lowering posted speed limits is complicated. The act of lowering them alone and then of course through the respective bylaws is one thing. Realizing the changes in behavior based on the posted speed limits, major successes aren't seen from solely lowering posted speeds. Where the changes happen are typically through roadway design, maybe that be through narrowing roadway width, or sorry, laneway widths. The other being traffic calming or other interventions. Certainly it's very desirable to lower speeds in communities, and we're seeing a lot of communities mostly wrestling between the 40 kilometer per hour speed limit or the 30 kilometer per hour speed limit, understanding that the changes, the safety benefits are far greater at 30 kilometers an hour. The anticipated compliance is much lower with a 30 kilometer an hour posted speed limit. So I would say if the district is interested in exploring reducing speed limits, and we should look at it more as reducing traveled speeds than necessarily just the posted speeds, and understanding that the impact of lowering posted speeds might just not be there. And as Mr. Carter referenced, without enforcement, which of course requires further financial resources, it is very, very difficult. Also, and I think every community takes a bit of a different look at this, but actually installing signage that would make that speed limit enforceable is a very, very large undertaking, in that both sides of the street, I believe it's every 200 meters, must be signed at the new speed limit. 50 kilometers is per hour is the default. And therefore you don't see speed limit signs in very many places, except with the exception of school zones, playground zones, or other locations that have been identified for lower speeds. So complicated, not impossible, certainly, but better in a suit of kind of services to lower speeds and improve road safety.
Just as a follow-up to that, though, like, I'm thinking of Sun River, the speed was changed. Council directed staff to change it from 50 to 40, and it was done and signed accordingly. So that's where I don't know. On my end as a counselor, it didn't seem to be that complicated. It was a petition the residents brought forward, and maybe that's the groundswell that's needed. And then we are at the enforcement part, unfortunately, is given that in order now to put in the traffic calming, and maybe that's the piece that's missing here as well, is where's the traffic calming? Speeding is a problem in our community, unfortunately, and we are looking to increase our CMP capacity to be able to deliver more traffic safety. As it seemingly is the only way to actually get to this point. But I do think that's a conversation that council has to have, because we're investing in traffic calming and other pieces to try to slow down traffic, and people aren't, so we have to bring in more police to enforce it now. And it is for public safety, but that's why people want sidewalks, separated bike lanes, active transportation routes, the trail network, and ultimately why we're here today. So maybe that's more a comment, but I just think there has to be, as we build out these roads, and the emphasis here are trying to accommodate vehicles and pedestrian safety, the speed element has to weigh in here somehow. Otherwise, it's loss of life, which is a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has to do with the street design, because if a street is designed such that it doesn't look like a drag strip, people tend to drive a little bit slower. And another thing that Councillor Teal Phelps Bondaroff in Saanich was doing was painting murals on the streets, and that has a tendency to slow people down a little bit, because it kind of just changes the nature and the feel of the corridor. But anyway, with that, I'll go to Councillor St. Pierre.
So looking at the existing cross section again, and I was thinking to myself that actually seems like the most dangerous option for cyclists. You've got, about 3 or 4 feet on either side. You have no buffers, and you've got traffic that basically imagines there's a lot more space. You've actually paved the shoulders. You've actually widened the road. Effectively, you have a traffic uncalming happening here, while actually putting cyclists on either side at risk. Now, it occurs to me that you could obviously, move to the secondary alternative if it seems suitable, because you're building out a large section, as Mr. Casey was suggesting. But what if you actually, and I know that there's some complications around this, what if you actually buffered both cycling lanes on one side and effectively reduced the width of the road to something narrower? Because that should achieve a traffic calming effect. If you combine that with trees and so on and so forth, obviously you have a situation where you have to try and get all your cycling traffic on one side of the road, but realistically that shouldn't be impossible to do safely. And that would be sort of a hybrid model that would allow existing cross sections to be, with some road painting and some buffers put in, made safer for everyone.
Perhaps through the chair, maybe just a bit of a follow-up on that. So we're talking about local roads here, which if designed and then operating the way they were intended to operate, we would have less than 1,000 cars a day, and forgive the jargon for a sec, but less than 1,000 cars a day, and they'd be traveling hopefully less than 50 kilometers an hour. So this guy is 2019 BC Active Transportation Design Guide. It's kind of the guide that a lot of communities are picking up on now and using as like their guidance for what streets should be designed like, and in particular what cycling and pedestrian facilities should be designed like too. And so the guide guides, for lack of a better term, that as long as a local street is performing the way it's supposed to, with under 1,000 cars a day and vehicles traveling under 50 kilometers an hour, that's actually an experience that's comfortable enough to be shared with people walking and cycling, especially cyclists in the travel lane with vehicles. So 1,000 cars per day means about 1 per minute. And that changes over the course of the day. But if you can kind of picture yourself on a bike, on a street where vehicles are traveling at a relatively modest speed, and then you're seeing approximately 1 per minute, I guess the guidance is that that's a comfortable and safe experience for someone on a bike. Where we start to see generally these facilities that are fully separated from the roadway is when the speeds are higher and or the volumes are higher, then the cyclist does not feel comfortable sharing the street, and they're onto their own ideally protected, if not just painted, protective facility. So maybe back to the point of the question, if we can get our local, whether it's traffic calming, posted speed limits, murals on the road surface, et cetera, the kind of the full toolbox of things we can do to make sure those local streets perform like a local street's meant to perform, then we get away from the need for sort of exotic and costly cycling, protected cycling facilities. But the big if, we need those local roads to function the way they're intended to function. Yeah.
Councillor St. Pierre.
Just a follow-up comment, really.
Anything?
As we build out nice new roads that have these extra paved shoulders, I think it is actually increasing the speed.
Yeah.
It's just, even in Sun River, people go fairly quick down Sun River regularly and a lot faster than 50 kilometers an hour occasionally. And so I think that as long as we're building out our cross sections to have that kind of visibility, you guys are the traffic planners, you know what I'm talking about, okay? There's no way people are gonna slow down. There's no way. So unless you actually put physical barriers in the way, or unless you put trees, unless you actually cut down on the viewscapes, make it feel less safe to go fast, people are gonna go fast. Regardless of the posted limit, could be 30, could be 40, they're still going 60. That's all there is to it. People are gonna take the road and they're gonna go as fast as that road seems to wanna go. Okay? So I'm looking at the existing cross section, which, nice wide, shoulders paved on either side. It says go fast. So in an idealized world, people don't do that. But we know that's not the world we're actually living in. People are going to go fast on these roads. So even though it's costly, I think that the alternative is actually roads that are not safe and no way to actually regulate traffic down to something safe in terms of speed. And I appreciate the work the ministry has put in, but they can make an addition to their volume next time.
Anything further from council? Okay, we're done.
No.
Public. So, yeah, I'm gonna open up then to members of the public for questions and comments.
Would you guys like to grab a chair and a mic over here? You might need to answer questions.
As far as.
Sorry, state your name and your municipality.
I'm doing a development on Penang
Okay,
Road.
go.
I think it's the only gravel road in Souk. It has no water. It's at the end of Ella Road. It is totally rural. There's like 6 people on the road that live there. So I would like to see that categorized as well. We've been told that we have to do streetlights and sidewalks, which is urban collector standards on a rural road. The way we used to always do it is we'd look up the road category, or we'd phone and ask what the category of the road is, and that told us what to tell our clients. We can't do that anymore because it doesn't matter where it's going, it comes back as urban collector standards. And that's what all the variances are about. They're coming in because of that. The old system worked fine. And council has the ability to change the category of the road. If an area starts to develop faster, bring up the category of the road. So there's always been a built-in way to do it. I don't quite understand, because I missed the first part here, but I don't understand why we're being asked for urban collector standards on every rural road in Souk, and why we don't look at what the roads are classified as. That's where it should come from, is your mapping, and it always has. We would always come to Rob Howitt or whoever and say, what's the road classification? And then I could tell the clients, this is what you have to do to your road. And then they can make a decision on whether they move forward or not. What we get now is they move forward based on what the category of their road is, and then they get surprised with all this other stuff. And that's what's killing everybody. So, you know, $150,000 worth of improvements for a single lot is ridiculous. And it's driving up the price of land every day. Give it some thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to provide his name for the record?
Hi, Rachel Sansom of the Highlands. I'm working with a few landowners in Souk, and I feel partially responsible for all this. So thank you very much for this workshop. It's been really, really great. Lots of good information. And I had a lot of questions that I've crossed out because they've been answered. Again, yeah, the street atlas is a great idea. It's a really great tool for both staff and people looking to buy land in Souk. It will inform them as far as their budgeting and what they can pay for the land, because it all works backwards as to what everything's going to cost and then what the land value is. So knowing those things up front are always really, really good information. I really do like the rural standards that are coming forward. Looking forward to, again, working with staff to find out what the appropriate cross sections might be. 3 meters of boulevard, again, to be able to have some flexibility there would be great, because nothing always fits the way it does on paper. So being able to have a little bit of flexibility, but also give staff certainty there would be great. I did have a question about whether frontage improvements are going to apply to the small scale multi-unit housing when they come in for building permit. I don't know if that's a question for staff, perhaps through the chair. Because if that is the case, that would certainly accelerate the need to have this sorted out sooner than later. And then just a quick comment about potential large developments coming in. If, say, something were to happen in a rural area, I think at rezoning, you're certainly able to ask for all that stuff. It's only sort of a building permit subdivision where you're restricted. So, you know, maybe give you some comfort that you do have the ability to ask for higher standards at that time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Staff, do you want to tackle the question that Ms. Sampson had?
Yeah, through the chair to council, with the draft development 404, there will be exemptions, and there will be exemptions under subdivision or exemptions under building permit. We would be recommending any additional units, such as with the new legislation and policy that's come forward, to require it for circumstances where you're getting additional units, but it's up to council with what they would like to do with the exemptions.
Thank you. Anyone else? Are we done already? Okay, so we have some recommendations here. Would anyone like to move? I guess we. The slide we didn't see.
Process.
Okay. So, would anyone like to move the recommendation on screen? Or the
Just point of order, what's missing here? Like, for me, it has a colon subdivision. We're directing. Oh, I see. And then it says to be identified by committee. So what have we identified? I don't know if something was said and there wasn't a microphone on it. I don't actually know. I don't know what's missing here. Or sorry, what is missing? Something's missing.
Nothing is identified. We have a solution that we presented, a solution for council's consideration that could be one of many. So it's a matter of if council would like to make a recommendation with regards to the rural and suburban boundary. Right now, in the report, it suggests considering rural instead of suburban for the Gateway residential area as well as the Silver Spray area. And it's asking and it's suggesting incorporating a new rural local cross section as well. And that's
Okay, so for the benefit of those viewing online, can that be put on the screen? Where that bullet is? Or can it just be read out? So then the closed captioning will pick it up.
Staff are discussing it. Counselor St. Pierre has a question.
Sorry, one of the PDFs attached to my report is a summary that clearly sort of illustrates what the suggestion is for council's consideration. And we can put that into words on the resolution. It's just a matter of, yeah, that one is what is being suggested for a resolution. That's the visual presentation of it.
Do you have a page number for that? Counselor St. Pierre has a question. I'm gonna allow him to
I'm just looking
speak.
for some clarification around this motion in front of us. So right now we'd be looking at potentially changing the designation of the Gateway area to rural cross section. So like that confirmed, and then I have a very important follow-up question.
Yes, that's confirmed. So that's changing it from suburban to rural for the Gateway area. By no means does this affect the land use designation in the OCP. This is strictly for the TMP and 404.
Okay, so far as identified in this committee, the only thing we have is changing Gateway to rural. Is that are we on the same page or? No, no. Okay, so here's the very important follow-up question. You mentioned that the next revision on the TMP would look at a road atlas. It was suggested by a member of the public that using the road atlas for road designations would actually simplify and make much more clear to developers and to staff exactly what they're dealing with and potentially make for an improved process. Is that what we're looking at? Or what exactly are we looking at here? Because it sounds great, but I'd like staff's take on what using a road atlas would look like. And is that what we want to be doing?
There's a lot to.
I know, I'm sorry.
It's, well, how could I explain this easier?
Because otherwise the question's still out there. It's the elephant in the room right now, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, happy to shed a bit of light. I get the sense that whether a road atlas or something of that effect moves forward is ultimately up to council. That's something I'd like to see. We've done this sort of thing for other communities. It can be done. It takes time, but it can be done, and sort of the parameters of it in terms of how far we would go with it. Like that can all be directed by council in terms of what you'd like to see.
Sorry, I have a follow-up comment here. This is very important. We already know that we have the power of decision making, ultimately that we make the rules. But when you say it's up to council, what that really means is that I don't get an answer to my question in terms of what does your professional expertise tell you about using a road atlas in practice? Does it make for delays for developers? Does it make for extra costs? Does it create a need for another FTE position and staff just to deal with the nonsense that's created? I want answers that help us with a decision, not that we get to make the decision because we already know that.
Gotcha. Okay, in terms of delays to developers, it would do the opposite. It would make life just things more clear in terms of what the expectations are. So I think be less time for applicants coming forward. in terms of cost to there would be a cost to the municipality to undertake that exercise. So there's costs there. In terms of, I think, overall certainty, it'd provide a greater degree of certainty over what we're seeing right now. In terms of how it relates to what we're sort of the core of the discussion today, I would suggest it's like it's in addition to or after. I think this can happen today. What we're kind of debating today or in the near term can happen. And that sort of more fulsome atlas exercise could happen at a later date. Unrelated, but not like this outcome today should not necessarily be dependent on that exercise.
Sorry, could I ask just questions at council? Because I want to understand if this is sort of what I'm hearing. So on this screen right now, you have three areas. Like it's very clear to developers what cross section they're doing. You have a town center, you have a suburban, and you have rural. And then there's cross sections that apply to each of those. What a road atlas is going to do is say for this entire town center suburban area, the cross section right now says a sidewalk on one side of the street, but not the other. So what a road atlas is going to do, it's going to look at this whole area that is the suburban area that has one local cross section applied to it. And it's going to put certainty on the main roads through this local area saying, going down here, all the sidewalks are going to happen for sure on this side of the street because all the hydro poles are on the other side of the street. So the only certainty that the road atlas is doing, it's a big undertaking and we can do it. It does provide a little bit more clarity, but it's essentially explaining for this local suburban cross section, essentially what side of the street the sidewalk is going to go on. So it will tell someone what side of the street it's going to go on. It's not going to give the developers any further information. It is and please help me out if I'm wrong here. It is a massive undertaking that's just basically telling you what side of the street is going to get the sidewalk. It is not going through this area and dissecting every single street and saying, this is going to be a local urban, this is going to be a local suburban, this is going to be a rural. If that's what council wants to do, we need direction from that. It's basically saying we want to go dissect an entire suburban area into 3 or 4 or 5 different levels of service. It's completely different than just creating a road atlas, but we need clarity on this because it is a massive undertaking and a big financial undertaking.
Mr. Carter, thank you so much. Because that's what we needed to know. Okay, so this is a huge job. Right now, what is being suggested road atlas would require what's normally done with the road atlases would just be basically figuring out which side the sidewalks are going on and the streetlights and so on and so forth. Something that would actually meet the needs of council would actually be going through that entire area and deciding which of 3 different cross sections we actually want to use. And that would be an immense undertaking.
Yes, so what I'm hearing is council's desire is essentially undertaking an entire redo of the transportation master plan pertaining to the urban or suburban area. So what I'm hearing is, I haven't heard any concerns for the town center or for the rural areas, but everything that is suburban, basically undertaking a transportation master plan redo to look at every single suburban area in Souk and seeing where we want to change the requirements of the level of service going throughout Souk. And it is a massive undertaking because we need to make sure there's continuity and everything between the roads. So if you're going from residential block to residential block and changing requirements of the cross sections, how do those interlink with each other? So it's possible, but what I'm hearing is we want to do a redo of the transportation master plan pertaining to the suburban areas within Souk. And then another important piece is to have a road atlas created with that undertaking because of the complexities of actually going between different cross sections in sort of a block or small area basis.
Thank you. And I can see the terror in your eyes. So that's a good answer. Further question. I feel like, for example, Mr. Clarkson, who was in here just a little while ago, was talking about Penang Street and so on, his gravel road. And it strikes me that there are areas on the periphery of the suburban areas that might actually, those will probably be the ones coming to us for variances in the future. Just clearly that's where we're going to start having our variances happen. As soon as we sort out this gateway thing, that'll be the next place where that starts to happen. What are your thoughts in terms of classifications for some of those?
I wouldn't have a thought or an opinion unless I went down and looked at the road, particularly on its own. And I don't know exactly which road that the gentleman was speaking to tonight. In terms of next steps, like I hear what council's desire is, and I'm not against it. It's a lot of work, but I'm willing to do the work. And that's not a problem. But if you want to undertake looking at the whole suburban area and changing those classifications within there, it's a big undertaking. It's not a 1 month process. It's like a 6 month to plus with public consultation. What we presented today is just basically in alignment with what we're seeing for variances. It doesn't cause much change. Right now, within the Gateway residential area, we're seeing stick to the road out there and make sure there's a gravel path on the side of the road. That's somewhat in alignment with the rural context. So I've introduced a rural cross section that's kind of in alignment with that path. So making that change is not substantial, but it would basically address a lot of the concerns that came forward for variances. And the same thing is being presented for the Silver Spray area. Again, that's a council desire. If you'd like to change that level of service to that area for rural, that'll help out, I think, with about 80% of the issues that we're seeing. If everything else stays the same, variances are in place for a reason. The gentleman that was in tonight, he will come for a variance, and we're just going to have to go through these variance challenge. I have to have my staff make referrals in alignment with the bylaws. They'll come to council for variances. They'll speak for, we might speak against. Everyone will give their pros and cons, and council will have to make a decision on that. But ultimately, if we want everything addressed, we're talking about a redo of the transportation master plan, most likely being undertaken next year. Would probably be the soonest that it could, or near the end of this year. It would depend on finances and availability. And then looking at a street atlas in terms of redoing the whole suburban area within Sooke.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the gateway proposition that's in front of us right now will solve 80% of the variance issues, most likely, just a guess, but that's what I heard as a number. And that any variances that are happening here that I'm describing can potentially be handled in the future through a variance process, but that they're not necessarily worth at this point going to a more complicated transportation master plan that'll take more time, money than we have. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Councillor Bateman, Mayor Tate, and then Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to point out the third clause in today's recommendation is that we direct staff to consider a midpoint review of the transportation master plan. Ipso facto, as Dan was telling us, this is not a Band-Aid, but a really good course direct. And then we get to have these longer conversations all over again. You know, we've never used the words road atlas in this chambers in my 6 years here. So it's the start of a new conversation and a midpoint review. And you, Mr. Carter, you keep referring to a total redo. This is a really substantial document. You know, the new street atlas would be informed by the directions in this document. And it doesn't have words like redo scare me because this is supposed to be a good 10-year document at the minimum. And anyway, that's all I got to say.
So you're correct, Councillor Bateman. These are documents that are supposed to be put in place for 10 years. And please correct me if I'm wrong. A midpoint review would be a check-in. Let's look at the project list. How much has been completed? Where are we at today? Is this good? Yep, it's a good thing. Do we need to make any adjustments, minor adjustments that could be amended? Yes. But what I'm hearing in terms of road atlas and changing classifications through a suburban area is a redo of a major piece of a transportation master plan that needs the public consultation as well. Yeah.
So that's a decision for us further down the road. And you'll make it very clear to us in that staff report that this is a major project and maybe we don't need to do it at this point, but we definitely need that midpoint review.
Yeah, the midpoint review could be a time that you determine from that midpoint review that these extra steps need to be taken because it is absolutely not working. Yeah.
I would add too, if I could, that so like a midpoint review would absolutely be a good time to do that if that was the direction this goes. I would argue though that sort of this full comprehensive look at the entire suburban area is going deeper in terms of analysis and road by road specifics is going deeper than was ever done in the 2020 TMP or the previous TMP as well. So I don't know if redo or whatever it might be, but that's an added level of detail over what was done previously.
Okay, Mayor Tate.
Thank you, Chair. Is there an actual motion on the floor? Like, is this a live motion that we're debating now?
No.
Okay. I was going to propose a resolution here because it seems that there's just what council is asking for isn't necessarily being understood clearly, and perhaps back and forth. And it would just be that that the committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to report back on the outcomes or what was heard or next steps following May 21st, today's workshop. So from today, and I guess I can move that. So I'll speak to it and you can throw it out if you like. It's just, what did council bring forward, either through the written submission before or through conversation today? What has staff heard and what are the next steps? Because it just seems that there's something missing to me. What is the policy piece that's missing that council should consider? I feel we drift into very technical pieces that creates a reaction by staff and the consultants. I understand why you do this work every day. So it may not be obvious to a lay person that is an elected official. So the impact of is unknown or not fully realized. So that's where it's like, okay, we've had this workshop today. What did we learn? Here's what the next pieces are. And this is what we recommend changing, leaving the same or not. The road atlas seems really informative. Then there's sort of pushback to that. I don't understand why. So I don't want to abandon it because I don't understand it. Is it funding? Is it what? I just thought it would be an appendix to the master plan and not a redo or a rewrite, but staff feel different. And again, I'm taking a layperson perspective and trying to figure out what the overarching policy and what are we trying to solve here? And that's not clear to me. It may be just because I'm ill at the moment, or that we've been looking at this for a while here. So maybe it's just good to just pause it for now. Here's what was heard. Here's a report back. And then council can be more, okay, direct staff to make this change or recommend this policy be revised, or at strategic planning, let's raise this item. Here's the cost impact. And just so it's a little more clear on what we're trying to do, because it just seems like a big mess with unknown impacts to me. So that's what I'm moving. Thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre. No.
So speaking of the motion, if we actually vote in favor of this, does this mean that we can't actually move any of the further motions forward or any further resolutions? Because it sounds like we're basically putting everything on pause or tabling it. Is that correct?
I don't view it as a tabling. I'm making a next motion, and then at the next regular council, there can be a report here. We recommend you make this change to this policy or this bylaw or this to accomplish that based on what staff heard, right? So I'm not, otherwise I would have postponed the whole thing. This is just to get clarity so that staff and council are clear on what we're trying to accomplish, because I think people are not clear right now.
I just want to confirm what I'm hearing because I'm not clear myself now. Are we looking for staff to basically fill in the blanks where it says determined by committee of the whole? Is that the idea?
No, it's to report back. We heard that council has speeding as a concern, but it's not in this. This is a tool that you could be used to do that. We hear that council wants to consider the Gatewood area. Then it would be the motions as it stood. And do you want 2 cross sections or just 1 or 3? 4, this is what we think a road atlas is. This is how it would impact the transportation master plan. This is what it would cost to do that. 5, a midpoint review. What is midpoint? Is this a 10-year document? Is midpoint 2025 or or what? And what does that look like? What other consultation is occurring in the community right now that would benefit from add-ons, this or that? What is not clear? What is staff not clear on and needs council to be a bit more specific when setting direction? We've heard other areas of Sooke be referenced, how and when, or those remain as variances. So when those others come forward, no, the strata piece here, policy X or strata bylaw, whatever, needs to be amended in this way. And it would just be a checklist of stuff. This is a workshop to me. So here's what came out of this workshop and what our next steps to address a problem potentially could be, and what action we need to take or direction we need to give to improve the process. I thought ultimately that's why we were here.
Okay, sorry, that was not my understanding of what we're here for today. I thought that all the things that you said, perfectly good and valid, but I thought that's what the third resolution was. Recommend staff have a midpoint review, and then all those things would be considered, because that sounds actually not like a workshop for council and not even a report by staff. It sounds like the midpoint review. I thought that today we were looking at trying to reduce the number of variances where we were at odds with our own policy, and that the first recommendation, really there was a blank to be filled out there in terms of changing the designation of the gateway area or the rural area, basically sorting that out. And I would like some clarity on that.
Our corporate officer has something to say.
Thank you. And this may not speak to what you're saying right now, just because I put my hand up before this latest comment, but I was just going to provide clarification on the procedural matter. So Mayor Tate has essentially, with the motion before you, is wanting to refer this to staff for more information, in which staff would provide a more fulsome staff report hearing the comments that were heard today in order to provide council with more information, in which at that time, council would be enabled to make the motions that potentially they would have made today. So it just essentially defers that decision to a later date with more staff information. It's not tabling per se, but it is moving the discussion from today, having an additional staff report with more information in which council would continue this deliberation.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Beddoes wanted to speak to the motion.
Yeah, I'm willing to support this motion. I'm very confident that staff is fully engaged in this discussion. They have a very good understanding, I think they do anyways, of where we had some stumbling blocks. And I look forward to them reporting back of possible motions that we could entertain. Gateway was a fairly easy one. Answering my questions in regard to duplexing and how that could be solved was another, and those were in the last 6 months. Those are the two areas that gave us most of the grief. The other stuff we should look at, but that can come at a little later time. I'm confident that staff come back from this motion and we can continue on and solve this problem for good. So I'll support that motion.
Anyone else on the motion? Okay, so I'm going to call the question. All in favor? It's unanimous. All right, so we're not going to look at these other recommendations then. Okay, so next up, I guess, is adjournment. We have a motion for adjournment. All in favor?